Morning. It's just after 9:30, so apologies for that. This West Berkshire local plan examination hearing session is now open. I'm William Fieldhouse, the inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan. A reminder, please, if everyone could switch their mobile phones, laptops, etc., onto silent. Excuse me. Water is provided, so please don't bring hot drinks or food into this room. Toilet facilities are located out through the door on the right-hand side. I assume there's no fire alarm test planned for today, so if the alarm does go off, we will need to evacuate the building following the green exit signs and convening outside. Ian, the programme officer, is around again today, so if you need any assistance, have a word with him. You'll be aware, I'm sure, if you weren't all here yesterday, most of you certainly were, that yesterday's and this session are looking at policy SP17 in the plan about the North East Thatcham strategic site. Yesterday, we dealt with issues 4.1 to 4.6 and 4.12 on the agenda and part of 4.7. So we're going to pick up the rest of 4.7 first, which is about the green infrastructure and public open space provision on the site. We've got all day today if necessary. I suspect we probably won't need all day today to finish off the agenda items, but we'll take as long as we need to. We'll probably have a comfort break around 11 o'clock and break for lunch around 1 o'clock, unless it looks as if we may be coming towards the end and we can make a decision then whether we just want to carry on rather than have a lunch break. So we'll see how we get on for that. A reminder that the agenda, we'll go through the order of the agenda items, obviously, and as I said yesterday, some of the agenda items include reference to the council's responses to my action points, although I think we've probably dealt with most of those now, but if any of those arise, we'll deal with that. We'll pick that up as when we get to it. So as usual, I'll start with a few questions to the council on each of the agenda items, and then when we've heard the responses to those, if anyone else wishes to make a contribution, just put their nameplate up on end. I'll bring you in its appropriate time. When I do ask you to make your contribution, please remember to turn your microphone on by pressing the button. The light should go red. Make sure the microphone's reasonably close to you and at an appropriate height so that it picks up your voice. I don't think there's anything else I need to say by way of introductions. I'll go around the table again to allow people to introduce themselves just for completeness, and also I know at least there's one person here that wasn't here yesterday. But then before I do that, are any procedural queries that anyone wishes to raise or matters arising from yesterday they wish to pick up that won't be covered by the agenda items today? No, okay. Yeah, Mr. Pike.
Thank you. It's just I was contemplating that I might need to refer to the online policies map because the paper copy doesn't have sufficient resolution. It appears not to be functioning at the moment. Oh. The base map is not being displayed. It's an IT problem. But if we come to that, well,
I looked at it a short while ago.
Okay, it may be to do with machine or possibly the web Wi-Fi system. But
right.
Okay, if it was working, it may be working now, but it wasn't a few minutes ago. Okay, thanks. Yeah, the interactive version.
Yeah, that's the one I've looked at. Okay, but the one you add layers to.
It's the one you can zoom in. Yeah, online. Yeah, it wasn't.
And then add the different layers as. Okay. Any observation from the council?
So it is working. I think it might be a matter of the Wi-Fi, perhaps, where it's the difficulty in bringing layers through if you're on the guest Wi-Fi. But it is working. There's not anything broken in terms of the links.
So there is, from past experience, that council staff access their IT through a different server than public. So there are quite often cases where they can see stuff that the public can't. But anyway, we'll come back to let that stand for the moment, and we'll return to it if the need arises. Thank you.
Okay, but if you want to put reference to the policies map, you can explain what it is, and I can look at it in due course if necessary. So we also have the benefit of some other maps relating to this site within the plan and the modifications and the site visit map that they were provided for me. Any other procedural points then? No queries, no. So can I ask the council representatives to introduce themselves, please, and I'll go around the table.
Emmeline Lambert, Council, West Berkshire District Council.
Laura Callan, West Berkshire Council.
Rachel Lancaster, West Berkshire Council.
Paula Amarelli, West Berkshire Council.
Gareth Johns, Provision, on behalf of various clients.
Good morning, Matthew Spry from Lichfields on behalf of the North East Action Partnership.
Morning, sir. Rupert Warren, KC, part of the same team.
Morning, it's Andy Ward from New Master Planning. Yeah, same team.
Good morning, sir. Peter Richards, Landscape Architect, again, the same team.
Morning, sir. Mike Bodkin, Town, on behalf of Pinson's Lane.
Good morning, sir. Roger Tustain, Nexus Planning, on behalf of Crowdays.
Good morning, sir. Alan Dival, Director at Walsingham Planning, on behalf of the Colthrop Village Consortium.
Good morning, sir. Andrew Black Consulting, on behalf of Bucklebury Parish Council.
Good morning, sir. Councillor Simon Pike on behalf of Thatcham Town Council and also Simon Pike, individual representative. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. Councillor Chris Reed, member for West Berkshire Council, Bucklebury.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Okay. So as I said, we'll pick up now where we left off yesterday, which is under issue 4.7 on the agenda, but specifically question 4.8, which is will policy SP17, along with the other relevant policies in the plan, be effective in ensuring the provision of a comprehensive green infrastructure network on the site. In terms of other relevant policies, I think the two most other relevant policies are DM40, which is about the quantitative provision of public open space. Is that correct? Just one minor thing. There's a reference in SP17 under the heading community in the final bullet point, which refers to DM41, which I think should be DM40, yeah?
Yes, that is.
And then there's another reference in the modification to green infrastructure refers to the M40, which I'll come on to some questions about those in a minute, but just that. And the other main relevant policy presumably is SP10, which is about green infrastructure provision, the strategic policy. So if necessary, I mean, we will talk about those, the detailed wording of those at a future session, but in terms of the applicability of them to this site, you know, it's not just what this policy says. There's further detail in those policies that are relevant. So I'm aware of that. Thank you. Right, I'm just going to come back to some questions about the provision of what SP17 is requiring in terms of on-site provision, both within the developable area and beyond that within the red line. So your statement makes clear that the developable area will be expected to provide the open space required to support the development in line with policy DM40. So that's the quantitative amount of open space, yeah? And that is actually made clear by the modification to the SP17 under the heading green infrastructure, where there's a reference to provision of open space within the developable area in accordance with policy DM40. There does seem to be quite a lot of repetition because you've got under community, you've got some bullet points about open space, and then they appear again under green infrastructure. I'm just wondering whether this sort of repetition causes a bit of confusion because of slightly different phraseology and things. So that's a minor point. We'll deal with what it's actually asking for in substance, but there might be just a bit of tidying up that might be helpful there. Okay, so to look at it the other way around, the significant green infrastructure buffer beyond the developable area, as you now define it, but within the red line, wouldn't count in quantitative terms to meeting the standards in DM40. Is that correct?
That's the idea, yes.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. So just thinking about what DM40 requires in terms of broad quantities of open space on the site. Well, first of all, do those quantities refer to all types of open space within the developable area, i.e. playing pitches, allotments, children's play areas, informal open space?
Yes, that's correct. The definition for green infrastructure is in the appendix glossary at the back. So we anticipate that all those things would be possible within that space. It's on page 272 of the plan itself. There's a
Yeah, but
definition of green infrastructure.
The M40 doesn't talk about green infrastructure, does it? It talks about public open space.
The public open space would form part of the green infrastructure
Right.
sort of general principle of on the site.
So the question is, do these quantitative standards relate to all green infrastructure within the developable area, or a subset of that green infrastructure that you would call public open space?
I think they're separate things in terms of public open space can be part of the green infrastructure provision,
Yeah,
but it's got its own set of what it is required to do that could then come out of the green part of that green
but
infrastructure.
the 3 hectares to 4.3 hectares quantitative requirement, just that you could only count what we would call public open space towards that.
Yes.
So what would that include?
Well, that's this sort of
Is it listed anywhere?
I don't think there's a list of it. I can come back to, I need to check what that would include. I'm not sure at the
I
moment.
mean, obviously, well, usually those standards would include things like sports pitches, children's play areas, but not necessarily sort of landscape fringe areas and
Yes,
things.
yeah, and that's the intention, that this is public, for the
Well,
public
you
to
could actually
use,
go on and
benefit.
use.
Yes, actually go on and use it.
Okay.
Whereas the green infrastructure could be a much wider range of things.
Yeah, I understood. And a lot of that wider range of green infrastructure would be beyond the developable area, but there would be some within developable area.
Yes.
Okay, so just if we're thinking about what you would call public open space within the developable area, then the standard is 3 to 4.3 hectares, which is, I think, it's a fairly long established standard. It has some origin somewhere, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. No one seems to be querying it. But that's per 1,000 people. So just it's in very broad terms, I'm just trying to think about what the sort of quantities are here. So for a development of 1,500 homes, that would be somewhere around 3,500 people, would it? Based on
Based on
2.3,
rough
2.4.
population. Yeah.
So multiplying that population by 3 give you a sort of 11 hectares in broad terms, and by 4.3 around 15 or something. So that's in ballpark figures, that's the sort of amount of open space. And how big's the developable area that you've now defined? Do we know? I think the site's around 170, isn't it? And it's
So the developable area is in total is 102 hectares.
okay. Right, okay. So just thinking about that in broad terms, you're looking for between 11 and 15 hectares of public open space within that. And would that public open space include the secondary school sports pitches?
At this stage, we haven't sort of got it down to that level of detail.
They could if they were available for public open space.
If they were available
Sorry,
for public open space.
if they were available for public to use.
Yes, I would anticipate they could be, but at the minute we haven't gone down to that level of detail about the use of the facilities.
Okay, so 100 hectares and a proportion of it, 11 to 15, would be this open space. Okay, and that, I mean, there was an addition of the reference to allotments in the modification. Again, would that count towards that provision, or would that be something separate?
I don't know whether that would meet the definition of public open space, because they're not available to the public, they're let to individuals.
Okay, and what was the justification for putting that in at this stage? Was that something that was overlooked before? It was always part of the intention, or?
It's referred to in the Thatcham Strategic Growth Study as something that could be put on the site. And if you don't feel that it's necessary, then we could unpropose that modification if you think it's not required.
I guess the question is, we'll see what others think, but I mean, is there some evidence of demand for allotments?
I think there is demand for allotments. I'd need to look and talk to the teams who deal with allotments to sort of know the numbers, but yes, it's my understanding there is demand for allotments.
Yeah, okay. And obviously, it's something to be negotiated through the master planning process anyway, but okay, thank you for that. Well, I may as well deal with this now, because we're going to come back to the maps and the settlement boundary and developable area again, but just to sort of flag this up now in case you need a bit of time to think about it, I'm just trying to understand back to some of the things we were talking about yesterday. So you've got 11 of the 100 hectares that's developable. You've got 11 to 15 that will be open space. You've got the schools and the local centre, community centre. Obviously, you've got transport infrastructure, stuff like that. So have you got a broad feeling for how much would be available for housing development? Because I know that you said you've defined it in terms of capacity to deliver 1,500 using a density assumption, presumably of an average of 30.
So we've used the density pattern book approach, which then takes the developable area down to 60% of the total. That takes into account the green infrastructure, the public open space, all those things come out.
So of the 100.
So of the 100, you then get down to 61.
Yeah.
Or 60 if we're using 100.
Because that has to include the schools and things as well.
So no, because they're specific requirements that potentially, it might include the primary, but it wouldn't necessarily include the secondary because that's potentially above and beyond what the development itself is required. It also doesn't include or might not include the healthcare facility. Again, that's land that might be required outside of just for the site. And things like the oil pipeline and gas pipelines, we've taken those off as well.
So you think that having accounted for the public open space, the schools, those sort of things, there's around 60 hectares available for housing development?
No, so there's 60. We're taking those things off we've just talked about. There's about 50 hectares left for housing.
Right. Okay. And that's using your density pattern.
Yeah.
That's what.
And it uses 35 dwellings per hectare as the calculation from that. But that document doesn't specifically look at strategic site allocations. It's more general for just sites. So there is a little bit of flexibility within that sort of 50 hectares that, to allow for other things to take place on the site and things like that.
But that's the basic rationale. So we talked about what the boundaries to the developable area were yesterday along the northern side. But and the quantitative terms, that's broadly what's gone on here. Is doing that. Okay. And then there's all the sort of caveats to that about the master planning process, the things you've got to take account of, and all those things. But that's broadly it. Okay, that's fine. Thank you for that. Okay, understood. So in terms of then the open space provision, sorry, is that? Okay. In terms of the open space provision, as I said, there's the M40 applies to the public open space on site. The SP10 has got a whole load of criteria to be taken account of, thinking about the broader green infrastructure, and that would be both applicable within the site, but the area to the north. And then specifically in the policy, it talks about the green infrastructure buffer, that's between the developable area and the site boundary, providing a strong defensible boundary between the developable area and the adjoining countryside and ancient woodland. And that's the basic objective of all this. And that's not shown on the revised plan, I don't think, is it? But it's dealt with no, it is shown, isn't it, with the green infrastructure buffer. So basically all of the area outside in the red line outside the developable area is shown as that green infrastructure buffer. Okay, thank you. Right, anything else you want to say about how that all works? And that's helpful.
Not at the moment, yeah.
Right, now, Mr. Pike.
Thank you, sir. Following up your question on allotments. So allotments are generally the responsibility of parish councils. I think, in fact, it's the only specific obligation of parish councils in relation to infrastructure. My understanding, which I hope to be able to confirm shortly to you, is that the allotments in Thatcham are fully utilised with a waiting list. And it would be, I'm not sure if it's appropriate for this level of local plan, if it's the intention of West Berkshire Council that the allotments would be taken over by the town council, that if it might be appropriate to put that in as an addition to or as a main modification to the existing main modification to the local plan. Thank you, sir.
Are you saying that you support the modification to refer to the provision of allotment?
Certainly refer to it, and I was commenting on the need for it, the potential demand for it, and also that reference about the management of it.
Okay. Right, Bucklebury Parish Council.
Thank you, sir. Just a number of points on the modifications that we have. The council in their matter statement say that these modifications are going to be effective in ensuring the provision of the comprehensive green infrastructure network. 1.41, the council then considers that the modifications will also give clarity sought that a significant portion of the site will be safeguarded as green infrastructure buffer outside of the developable area of the site. We are still completely unclear as to how that will be safeguarded in policy terms, and what the council is saying in terms of what's on the proposed modification plan as green infrastructure, and then how that hooks back into different policies in the plan in the future. And I think there's still some ambiguity around that we would welcome some clarity from. Maybe you're okay with it, sir. I don't think we've heard an unambiguous answer on that around how that's going to be safeguarded.
Well, reading the words in the plan and looking at the picture in the plan, it defines a developable area and it defines green infrastructure buffer. And the policy wording is, what is it that's you need reassurance on?
Where is that green infrastructure buffer defined in policy in the plan? Where is the definition of green infrastructure buffer, or where is there a strategic or a development management policy around green infrastructure buffers of what that actually means?
Well, the words say a green infrastructure buffer that creates a strong defensible boundary between the developable area and the adjoining countryside and ancient woodland.
Yeah.
And when you read that with the picture, isn't it clear about the extent of it?
But what does that? Where's the policy on that for future of that
protection
buffer?
of it?
Protection of
Yeah,
it.
okay. Does that not come in SP 10?
I'm not sure it does.
Do you want to just? I'll move on, and do you want to have a quick glance at it?
I'll have a look at that. I've got some other points though.
Yeah, okay,
I will have a look at that. If you're happy, if the council say that, then perhaps there is the certainty on there, but we don't think there is.
Just to be certain, then, it's not so much it's ambiguous about where the green infrastructure should be.
No,
it's about the long-term safeguarding of that.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That there shouldn't then be a further encroachment into that. At some point.
And what does that mean in future policy? For
when you say future policy, you mean a future review of the plan?
Yeah, and if anyone ever came into looking at one of those bits of land and thinking, well, let's build houses on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the key concern.
Okay, understood. Yeah.
The other bits, and I'll have a look at SP 10. Then in terms of under green infrastructure, the council is now saying that they're going to they're removing the community park linking Thatcham to the North Wessex Downs AONB, and we've always had concerns around the AONB and the linking between the two. So I think that yes, removal of that park is welcomed in terms of potential impact, but is that then effectively wrapped up in green infrastructure? Is there any replacement of that community park, and what becomes of that is a question for us.
Is the concern about public access to that green infrastructure buffer and the connections through there into the ancient woodland and, and beyond?
Yeah, that is a key concern from Bucklebury Parish Council of routes in, and then over the page also you have this strike through of the comprehensive network of accessible routes and connections within the development, and that's been struck out. Again, not entirely sure of the justification and effectiveness of that. Obviously, I don't want you to think that we're wanting our cake and eating it here, but effectively we're just trying to see how that works. The other point is that at the moment you have public footpaths through that site that you can walk through that site and up to the AONB. So what are the council saying about those existing footpaths? Because striking these points out doesn't stop the potential impact on the AONB, because you've got a public footpath that you can walk up to the AONB.
Well, the policy says the protection of existing and the creation of new public rights of way now, doesn't it? So that's
effectively replacing that bit that's struck through.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, our concern remains, though, that in terms of talking about landscape, provision of green infrastructure and protection of others, that effectively people on that site are going to be able to walk up into the AONB very easily. That's always been a concern from Bucklebury Parish Council,
right?
And the harm that would cause through the ancient, into ancient woodland as well, and that's it.
I mean, AON, I don't know what national policy relating to AONB is, but it's not to safeguard them from people visiting, surely. No, isn't one of the roles of their recreational and landscape value for the enjoyment of people?
Yes.
Yeah, so
But
the idea that you should be closing existing rights away to prevent residents getting access into the wider countryside.
But it's the other things alongside that
Yeah.
AONB that we were talking about yesterday in terms of ecology,
Yeah,
triple SIs, that
Okay.
alongside
Yeah.
that you're
yeah.
effectively.
So it's more,
But perhaps I'm not seeking only AONB, there's other aspects to it, so.
it's protecting the ancient woodland and the triple SIs and the local wildlife sites and
Correct.
the areas of ecological value from recreational disturbance, etc.
Yeah.
Is the concern, yeah?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, understood, yeah. Okay, well, again, there's, I think we'll talk about what the sort of arrangements are for how you plan and manage this sort of open space that's buffer and how it relates to the protecting areas. And again, there may be words in SB 17 and through the mechanisms that will be available, but we'll see. So thank you for that. Anything further on that? No, okay. Do you want to come back to before I?
Following on from the comments from Bucklebury Parish Council about this green infrastructure being defensible, to go back to the comment I made yesterday, the Vision 2050 explicitly shades this as areas for development in a future plan period, which rather undermines its defensibility. And that is one of the reasons why we believe that it was unsound to reference the Vision 2050 document as it stands within the local plan. Another point, going back to a comment made yesterday, is I believe West Berkshire Council said that the strip of land surrounding the ancient woodland was a buffer for the ancient woodland. That is a different definition to the one that was it appears to be on the policy map when we had the three distinct areas where it was described as a link between the areas. And that, I think, it highlights the need for a description of that boundary in words and not just on the map, because it's not clear how anyone in the future as to what the boundary reflects. For example, the map that we have, I don't think has contours on it, which made it rather difficult to work out what was going on. But yeah, I think that's the point, that we need to have a clear definition of that boundary in text terms, and also that will also relate to the relationship of the boundary to the exact position of the pipeline, which is not even described in the council's Matter 4 statement. It says that's what they've used to draw it, but it doesn't say where the boundary relates to that exact position. Thank you.
Something like the pipeline, something that you can just sort out through the master planning process in terms of, there'll be an easement requirement and.
Yes, but they've defined the boundary as being the cause of the boundary is the pipeline. They haven't described what the physical boundary, how it relates to the exact position of the pipeline. Is it one side? Is it on it? Is it one side? Is it the other side?
But whoever's doing the detailed design layout and assessing the impact of the pipeline, they're not going to rely on that map, are they?
No, but the point is
information available to that.
But you have a policy. You have a policies map, and this for example, affects whether that area would be green infrastructure within the red line area or not.
But that detail surely is something that could be sorted out through the detailed layout and landscape rather than.
I'll defer to your experience on that.
I'd have thought so anyway, but okay, thank you. I understand the concern, but I think it's a detail that there are mechanisms to address. Because I don't think there's any suggestion that line, you can build houses up to that line. It's not as black and white as that. Anyway, the whole issue of whether that developable area is justified and whatever is just, okay. Right, and Litchfields.
Thank you, sir. Just a couple of points. Just coming back to your question to the council, sir, about capacities and getting down to the 50 hectares, if you remember, which is where we ended up, I think, roughly speaking, for residential at 35 dwellings per hectare average, I think, was being used. Obviously, the maths on that's relatively straightforward. It's 1,750 units. So there's obviously a bit of an issue in having a cap at 1,500 if the council's own capacity work shows that the developable area at a proper density is 250 higher. In addition to which, sir, that didn't include, as I understood and heard the explanation, local centres. But there is almost certainly going to be some residential above, commercial and so on in the local centres. 3 of them, obviously, across the side. And it's at this stage, obviously, it's far too early to say how many units might be provided, flats and so on in that way. But that again takes the numbers appreciably above the 1,500 that we've got in the draft at the moment. So I just make that point, and we're no doubt come back to it. We've put a lot of work in so that you've seen on the partnerships master plan and the densities involved in that and where things would be. And if at any stage, obviously today you want to hear from Mr. Ward and Mr. Richards again on that, they're here to my left to answer those questions. The only other point I wanted to make, just picking up what's been said so far this morning on this, is the green infrastructure strategy includes with the modification this what's described as a green infrastructure buffer, which is notated, as you've seen on the current version of the policies map. On the partnerships version, there is a green area which is multifunctional. Obviously, it's a buffer in visual terms and stopping development. It's also an opportunity for public access, and there'll be some overlap with the open space recreational functions on the site. So that's not to say that it deals with all of the DM40 open space in inverted commas, but one of the benefits of having public access into that area, as the partnership sees it, is that it would be another area for recreation, not just for people on the site, principally for them, but for others too, using the public rights of way. So where it just connects that point that we came to right at the end of yesterday, Sarah, about the line on the proposals map that the council have now put in, demarcating that area. And the contrary view that we have, that we're urging upon you, which is that should be left to the LVIA and the application stage to be finalised. And this boundary between the buffer and what it's used for is a very good example of why our approach, we say, is more sensible.
Okay, understood the point about the boundary and what's defined as developable area or not. In terms of the role of the green infrastructure buffer, I'll get the council to sort of talk about that in a minute, but you've identified two things there, or three things actually, haven't you? It's a visual and physical, it's a visual screen to protect the landscape of the wider countryside in the A and B. It's a physical barrier to sort of define where development shouldn't go in the longer term. But you're also talking about the potential for public access and recreational value. I suppose that's an issue that will need sorting out one way or another in terms of that, which is obviously a beneficial thing in some respects, but the dangers associated with public access, recreational disturbance in sensitive areas.
Yes.
So, but all of those things could be quite legitimately things to achieve and address through a policy, but the detail would have to be sorted out through the master planning, the application process, and indeed the future management role of whatever's put in place to deal with that. So any brief observations about that from whoever's most appropriate?
Yes, I'll ask Mr. Ward, I think, just to comment on that in terms of how it would work in practice. In terms of the policy point you raise, I mean, I think we agree with that, and that's why obviously you would need to wait until you did the more detailed work in order to understand exactly where the line should go and the extent to which that area, that buffer area, in the wording at the moment in the modification, it says green infrastructure buffer, which is a kind of hybrid term, if you like, because it would be multifunctional because of the slopes, which you'll have seen already on your visit to the area. There would be it would have with planting a visual separation function, as you say, but that can't rule out obviously some sensible access for recreation as well off the footpath.
And presumably providing clearly defined access routes steers people in a way, and you can therefore protect other areas more easily rather than sort of cutting it all off with no access, and people would find their way in anyway, presumably.
Yeah, I mean, do you want to quickly?
Yeah, do you want to just sort of there must be some good practice that's
Yes, hi. Yes, I'm a chartered architect, urban designer, town planner, that we've been working on this for the consortium since 2018. And I was lucky enough actually to walk the site with a number of the consultants that were looking at the scheme from David Locks, as well as attended their workshop on the 1st of February 2020, where actually, one of the big things that came from that workshop, listening to the community, was this opportunity of having a country park along the northern slopes. I think some of those that have walked the site and seen the views that you get from there are quite tremendous back across the valley, and that opportunity to have a country park that would actually, I think, work for both Bucklebury and the development as well. It adds value to both communities of Thatcham and Bucklebury. Seemed a very sensible approach. In terms of management, yes, it would have to be managed. And what we've looked at in terms of the work we've been developing from David Locke's work is to actually have the park so that it does actually link all the three high grounds, the hills. It does mean that you have to avoid the long copse, which is an ancient woodland that does come down along the longest finger that comes in between Siege Cross and Coalthrop. And again, we've got a much wider buffer. I hate using the word buffer because buffer implies you keep off and nothing going on in there. But we're looking at least 30 metres around the ancient woodlands as a landscaped edge that can incorporate sort of the blue infrastructure too. That's really important as part of this site in terms of protecting the town from water runoff from the site. So there's all sorts of ways of managing the edges of a country park that can actually deter people from going into areas that may be more sensitive in terms of wetlands, swale features and things, which we will be using to slow the runoff down through the site. So there's some physical measures as well as sort of management measures. We probably will fence some of the ancient woodland off actually from where it doesn't work with the desire lines that we're looking for. Again, that we worked up with the council and locals too to make sure that works.
Okay, thank you. Well, yeah, town council. Now I'll get the council. I mean, the description of these country parks seems to be going back to something that the council has deliberately taken out. But I mean, I think whether further clarity is needed about the roles of this green infrastructure area, whatever we want to call it, we can have a think about. But I think it would be helpful just to get clarity about what the council's thinking is in terms of its visual role, its role as defining the development area long term, and the issues of recreational access and public enjoyment of the beautiful countryside, and the need to protect, sensitive areas and ecology, etc. So I think those seem to be the principles that I think probably everyone agrees with, but it's how you achieve that. Mr. Pike.
Thank you, sir. So that description sounded very interesting, but it's not part of the evidence base or the plan. Therefore, we would be worried as to whether that would be delivered if it's not. The description given by various representatives of Lichfield and North East Action Partnership. Yeah. So, and I think the same is also true as they mentioned it about the local centres, because that may be the intention, but the policy has a very broad definition in planning terms. Many uses within that would not provide housing dwellings above the properties. So I have to put my other hat on because I'm going to refer to something not relevant to Thatcham Town Council. That the policies relating to SANGs are, although not directly relevant because we're outside that area, some of the things that are described there would be appropriate for the general principles for design of this country park, because one of the other issues, it's not, as you mentioned, it's not clear to what extent it's open access versus biodiversity net gain. And because there's quite often a tension between the two. Thank you.
I think, yes, I agree. I think that's what we'll get the council to confirm. But I suspect the answer is yes, they want to achieve all those things. And it's about how, well, I mean, and as you say, there are ways of doing it, and there is good practice about how you go about achieving those different things, because inevitably those are the things that if people are living there, they're going to need to address. So, yeah, Bucklebury.
Thank you. So just a small point, I've had a look at SP10, and I think that just that modification that the council are saying on the green infrastructure buffer, I think if that just made it clear that it was in accordance with policy SP10, then it would be clear from our.
So in the way that there's a cross-reference to the M40, it's so significant about the need to comply with SP10 in this case. You think it would be? There's always a danger of trying to cross-reference in plans, isn't there? Because it becomes a selective process, and if you can say, well, why have you cross-referenced that but not that? So
there is, but I think it's what Mr. Warren was saying, that it's green infrastructure buffer, but it is green infrastructure.
Yeah.
And therefore it's SP10, and there are policies within SP10 about involving the loss of that infrastructure that would give comfort that that does stay as infrastructure. I just think referring across to it would be helpful to be semantics, but.
Understood. I don't want to look at the detailed wording of SP10 today, but it is on the agenda for a future session. So because it applies elsewhere as well, obviously, but in terms of its importance to this site, I can understand.
We don't have any issues with SP10, sir.
Okay.
Parish Council, so just so you know.
Thank you. Right. Finally,
I have received confirmation from our clerk that our allotments are fully occupied and that they serve the needs of the current population, but wouldn't serve any expansion. Thank you.
So you'd support,
yes,
town council would support the provision of allotment?
Yeah, I've had confirmation from the clerk of what I said in it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Council, do you want to come back on what we've heard and just confirmation of whatever?
Yes, so it's our intention that that green infrastructure buffer area would be in perpetuity in line with the details in SP10, which relate to management plans and things like that having to be developed. And that would be dealt with at the planning application stage, and how that was funded and arranged could be through a Section 106 or other sorts of legal agreements. That's not to be determined now, but that's sort of the principle of what we were thinking. We anticipate that public access would be within that area. The definition of green infrastructure that we're using, as I've mentioned before, is in the glossary, which talks about a network of multifunctional green and blue space and other natural features, and capable of a wide range of environmental, economic, health and wellbeing benefits for nature, climate, local and wider communities and prosperity. So that's sort of where we're thinking. We would be happy to include something within the supporting text to set that out in further detail if that was going to be useful. Just to set a little bit more, bit more information about how we envisage that being dealt with.
Okay. I mean, it's clear that to achieve the things in this SP17 and to achieve the things like protecting biodiversity, there's always going to be competing interests that need to be reconciled, and that's dealt with through the master planning and application process in the context of those other detailed policies. So, yeah, understood. I mean, is buffer the right word? I think maybe it isn't, but
we can consider the wording of it and see if there's something more appropriate.
Yeah,
we can look at that.
So obviously, you've got a careful definition of green infrastructure. And that doesn't necessarily include the word buffer. So
no, I think it was to try and distinguish between the green infrastructure you might have within the developable area, and that this is separate to that. That was partly, and to reassure the community that we're not anticipating development beyond that line ever, and therefore it is a buffer between this development and the communities to the north.
Okay. Which, since you just mentioned that, Mr. Black mentioned this yesterday, the idea of the DM2 policy about the strategic gaps between Thatcham and Newbury and other settlements around. In principle, following this process of master planning this site and defining the settlement boundary, if it isn't already defined, would come back to, is in principle the idea of a strategic gap between Thatcham as expanded and Coldash, Bucklebury, something that the council would consider or not for whatever reason?
We would need to relook at that as and when this goes ahead. It's not proposed in the current information. So.
But it would be potentially something you could look at in a future review once this process has worked its way.
Yes, absolutely. We would reconsider it at that stage.
Okay, thank you. Anything else you want to say before we move on from that? Right, okay.
Sorry, it's just on that point, on this, the green gap point, and on that policy, I can't find that, the wording of it, thank you, son. Yeah, so that wording, 9.13, I'd ask you just to have a look at that against policy DM2, because that says that further assessment as to an appropriate essential gap will need to be carried out when the extent of the built development on the site has been established. So we say that in the council providing that modification, which sets the built development of the site, then that should effectively now be, that process has been done. I don't see what else needs to be done now. If the council are telling you that the development boundary of this site has been set, then paragraph 9.13 has been made out. And they should therefore be presenting a modification to policy DM2, which includes this gap. I don't see what else needs to be done.
Leave it with me, because I mean, this whole idea of defining one, the developable area, and two, the settlement boundary at this stage is still things I need to think about, and whether it's justified. And one of the consequences of, I've noted that one of the things associated with that is that the application of the DM2 as well. So I think all those things are interrelated, aren't they?
Thank you, sir.
I agree, yeah. Councillor Reid, sorry.
I think that it's my understanding that when it was Newbury District Council for West Berkshire, there was documentation or at least wordings to a strategic gap between Upper Bucklebury and Thatcham. They disappeared, I think, under the tenure of West Berkshire Council. And I think the residents would be really happy to see those words coming back and the words in perpetuity, as West Berkshire stated earlier on.
So specifically, that's between Bucklebury and Thatcham as it may expand. As
yes, and I think also, you know, I don't think I'm out of order in saying Coldash would also be particularly interested, as would other neighbouring wards.
Okay, thank you. Right, anything further on green infrastructure? No, thank you. What I'm going to look at next is the historic environment, issue 413. And the question here was, will policy SP17, along with other relevant policies, be effective in ensuring that the development proposed conserves and enhances the historic environment in accordance with national policy? And then there's a main modifications proposed, which, if I could have just a look at the main modifications. Yeah, so sorry, this was a new section, wasn't it, added to the policy under the heading heritage. So this talks about development proposals being supported by a historic environment strategy to demonstrate how the site's historical development, archaeological remains and historic buildings and parkland will inform the scheme and help to create a sense of place. And then informed by an heritage impact assessment, archaeological assessment, and if needed, field evaluation. Then it would articulate how the proposed scheme would support an appropriate future use of the listed buildings in the area and minimise harm to their significance. The last bit I'm going to ask a couple of questions about, but broadly, this approach to an historical environmental strategy and a heritage impact assessment and the archaeological work, that's sort of fairly normal kind of standard approach. And those words were agreed with Historic England. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Historic England have asked for the modification. They've proposed the wording.
Yeah, okay. And it provides clarity about what exactly was provided and some detail about how to go about achieving it. Fine. In terms of specifically what this last part is requiring, how the scheme would support an appropriate future use of the listed buildings. So which buildings are we talking about there? Is it the ones that are the little islands within the developable area?
That's right, yes.
Around the developable area. And they are in different ownership, are they?
They are, yes. They're not included within the proposed site.
So what is meant by scheme supporting an appropriate future use of those buildings?
I agree, it's unclear.
I can see your mind working at that.
Yeah. I think what it's trying to achieve is that those buildings can continue with their current status and within, to consider their setting as historic buildings and to make sure there's, no long-term significant impact on that. I'm happy to take that away and look at sort of rewording that section. Potentially we could delete it if you felt that was more appropriate. But I'm happy to take that away and discuss it with Historic England and just sort of get some clarification on what they meant.
The listed buildings within the development area are in use. It's not that they're derelict and need.
No, they're in private ownership.
They're in private ownership and they're
used.
Being used.
Yeah.
So this isn't about sort of funding some sort of restoration or anything like that. This is just about not compromising their current value and use.
Yes.
In functional terms.
Yes.
by surrounding it by inappropriate, whatever.
Yes.
Right, okay, understood. And in terms of minimising harm to their significance, including demonstrate how the impact of development on their settings has been considered. I mean, should it be avoiding or minimising harm? I mean, it seems to imply that there will be some harm and you're going to minimise it. Should it?
But I think it's part of the whole assessment of how the development around those sites would be considered. And ideally, yes, you have no harm, but it's recognising there may be some, and therefore, ensuring that can be mitigated and minimised.
So it could be to avoid or minimise the harm.
Yes, it could.
Yeah. Okay, right, thank you. Litchfield's.
Thanks. We agree the second bullet point's not clear. I think more to the point, we're not actually sure that it's necessary because the first bullet point requires a proportionate heritage impact assessment, and properly done and applying the tests in the framework would essentially deal with ensuring an appropriate response to the setting of those listed buildings, including any appropriate treatment through the master plan. So and the tests of minimising or avoiding harm aren't the tests within the framework. So in our view, that second bullet point is unnecessary.
Yeah, I suppose the only slightly additional factor here is about some issue about safeguarding the continuing uses that are there. I'm not just talking about the setting of the listed building. It's actually not compromising whatever uses they're currently put to by introducing conflicting or.
I mean, I'm no heritage expert, but my understanding is that would be captured within.
Well, it's not really a heritage issue. It's more of a sort of a business operational use if they're in business use, I suppose. I don't know. I mean, I did see.
Yeah, I suppose, again, I'm straying out of my strict comfort zone, but in a sense, the ongoing use of those heritage buildings would be part of their setting and future use, and in the sense of it seems to me it would just be kind of wrapped up within that.
Okay, understood. Yeah, that's fine. Thatcham Town Council.
Okay, so just following from that conversation, looking at the introductory sentence, I'm wondering whether the word create is appropriate, or whether what you're trying to achieve is to maintain a sense of place. In other words, to keep them looking the sense that they are, or create a sense of place means do something different. And I'm not sure which is intended and which is appropriate. Thank you.
Well, I might took the sense of place being part of the overall development, using those historic assets to help create a sense of place of the new development, and the separate issue about how you then safeguard the individual listed buildings and their settings within that, I think is probably what I read into that. But you've still got your sign up. Is there another point? No, we finished. Okay, that's all right. Right, anything further you want to say on the historic environment section? So I can have a think about it. You maybe have to have a think about what bit of tweaking is needed there. Okay. Okay, so I've got a couple of issues now. First of all, flood risk and surface water. The council has said that the site is at low risk of river flooding, but there is a risk. There is an issue of surface water flooding within the site and in the Thatcham town. There are some flood alleviation schemes that are already in place on the site. I think that the policy has amended, refers to those, doesn't it? Yeah. Well, actually, that's the question I think I had. Your statement refers to SP 17, including a clause to ensure that existing flood defences and attenuation ponds already on the site are retained, protected, and enhanced, to ensure there's no impact on flood risk downstream as a result of the development. So, is that included in the appendix to your statement or not? I wasn't. I think if it was, I overlooked it.
It doesn't appear to be, but I think it will be covered under the bullet point, a flood risk assessment taking into account the Thatcham Surface Water Management Plan, because those attenuation ponds form part of that Surface Water Management Plan. We can, if it would be appropriate, we could include a a modification to propose that they are retained. The intention is that they are retained because they're an important part of the Thatcham flood alleviation scheme.
Yeah, well, okay, I have a thing. I mean, it seems to be that there's a general requirement to take account of the, it's not very specific about the things that are on the site and required for the site, so it may be worth something there. The other thing I want to ask about here is the modification adding an additional requirement for water supply and drainage strategy to include details of the phasing of development to consider likely upgrades needed for the water supply network infrastructure. Potentially that could be quite significant. Is this something that's likely to impact on the timing of the residential development?
No, it's not. It's just putting a marker down that, work needs to happen with Thames Water to look at water supply networks there. Discussions, I think, have taken place, and Thames Water are aware of the development and they don't see any significant issues, but obviously upgrades, if they're required, have a certain lead-in time, but we don't anticipate that would affect the timing and the delivery of the site.
So this isn't any sort of major, this is just some relatively modest upgrades that may be required. Okay. Okay, I don't have anything else for the council on the flood risk and this part of the policy is modified. Litchfield's.
Thank you. So just wanted to confirm our position on that last additional bullet point that's in the mod, which refers to the flood risk assessment, taking into account the surface water management plan. In our matter 4 statement, we refer to the Wheatwood specialist work, which is Appendix 6 of the development statement. And that is obviously a technical workup of what's required. And it shows that all of the existing ponds and drainage system is proposed to be retained. And there's, in addition, another, I think, 3 hectares, is it, Mr. Ward? 3 hectares of additional surface drainage and flood remediation measures proposed. So it's of a piece with what the council was saying, that wording would capture the protection of the existing situation.
Okay, thank you. Bucklebury Parish Council.
Thank you, sir. I think there's a wider concern here, and I'd like you to just have a look or refer you to the Thames Water Statement of Common Ground and what they say in relation to SP 17. And they say that the scale of development in this catchment is likely to require upgrades to the water supply network infrastructure and to both the wastewater network and sewage treatment infrastructure. And then it says a housing phasing plan and housing infrastructure plan should be agreed between the development LPA and Thames Water to avoid planning conditions controlling the phasing of this development. So they're saying that work needs to be undertaken. And it's that particular bit on the sewage treatment infrastructure that we say is missing here, because if you look at the modification, that's talking about water supply network infrastructure. There's a huge part to do with sewage treatment infrastructure here and with Thames Water, particularly in light of their financial difficulties at the moment around the funding of that, the phasing of that, and how that infrastructure. And I don't think, with respect to the council, it is a minor matter. I think this is a very major matter. It needs to be resolved now, should have been already resolved, and will require some considerable timing and coordination of this.
Councillor Reid.
Yes, I'd just like to raise again my concerns around Ousel Gully, which is on the eastern side in Midgham Parish. So opposite the road, we've just had planning permission for a new police logistics hub, which is going to have about 500 workers in there, significant amount of parking, and there will be flood alleviation put on that site. But considering the significant development the other side of the A4, I am concerned now whether that is going to be suitable, and maybe there should be consideration for further buffers on the other side of the A4 to the north, to compensate. That site where the police logistics hub will be floods every single winter. In fact, cattle are regularly taken off in about November, December, up to their tummies in water. So that is a significant flood area.
Okay, thank you. Litchfield, did you want to come back on the sewage treatment works?
Yeah, briefly, so just
Yeah.
on that point about the gully, when you look
Yeah.
at the illustrative master plan work that's been carried out, that's in front of all the detail which is in front of you, you'll see that 2 additional areas of surface water attenuation are in fact at the end, at the southern end, the bottom, if you like, of that gully, picking up that point. On Thames Water, so I think you've got all in the appendix number 4, I think, to the development statement that we have put in as part of matter 4, you will see all the detail of the discussions with Thames Water, both about water supply and wastewater treatment works and sewage. So that's all set out there. The important point is, yes, there will undoubtedly be the requirement for some work and no doubt some cost to the developers. But Thames Water aren't saying it can't be done. It's an objection to the allocation of the scheme or to any particular amount.
Or to what, sorry?
Any particular number. They don't say fine up to 1,500, for
okay.
instance, and no more beyond that.
But in terms of both the water supply and the sewage treatment, your work with Thames Water would suggest to you that the extent of that work would not be so costly or so time, it takes such a long time that it would sort of hold up the development.
Absolutely, that's right, and that's covered in the specialist work in the appendix 4.
Okay. Yeah, Thatcham Town Council.
Thank you, sir. So Thatcham Town Council policy commented on policy DM7 on water usage efficiency. And that's relevant here, I think, in the context of this question about supply. And that representation, which is pages 23 and 24 of the Thatcham Town Council Regulation 19, refers to the West Berkshire Water Cycle Study Phase 2. And it says, both water resource zones in the study area are classed as being under serious water stress, justifying the more stringent limit of 110 litres per person per day. And I won't read the rest of the reference, but that suggests that there is an issue not necessarily to do with the immediate pipe work, but the overall water supply situation in West Berkshire, given that it's a large part of it is based on extraction from chalk. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll look at the detail wording in DM7 when we come to that in due course. Yeah, Mr. Blackingham.
Sir, sorry, perhaps through you, I could just get clarity from North East Thatcham Partnership. Are they talking about the Hilson Moran utility statement? Okay, that's helpful because with respect, I'm not sure that does tell you a lot around foul sewage. It's worth you potentially having a look at that. There's a couple of paragraphs, 2.2 of that report, which sets out the requirements. There's a couple more paragraphs, 3.2. There's nothing in there that tells me that any work's been undertaken with Thames Water, or that would tell you or give you the assurance that you've just been told, unless there's something else that I'm missing.
Okay, understood. Anything else you want to say from Litchfield's point of view before no, okay. Council, anything further on this issue of the reference to sewage treatment?
Yes, so the first bullet point talks about appropriate infrastructure for water supply and wastewater. So we feel that's adequately covered.
But the second one talks about phasing because of upgrades to the water supply network.
It does, and potentially we could include water supply and wastewater networks in that modification if that was considered appropriate. That would be required anyway, just through negotiation with Thames Water. Thames Water haven't objected to this site. They've not raised any concerns. And they have said that new infrastructure can take up about 3 years to deliver. And so, you know, with the lead-in times for development and things like that, that's not likely to impact on delivery. And in terms of what's happened at Sandalford, in terms of the infrastructure going in there, other measures can be put in the short term to deal with, you know, the limited number of residents coming in until upgrades have been made. So there's not likely to be an impact on delivery as a result of that.
In terms of the principle of having an additional reference to phasing, if it is for water supply, but if it's equally applicable to wastewater, it seems sensible to refer to either not have it because it's not needed or to refer to both. It seems.
Yeah, if we can take that one away and have a look at it and just sort of work out what the base of that's come from, just to make sure that
Yeah, there
it
isn't
could be to
something.
do with a specific water supply issue based on the water cycle study. I just need to
Yeah,
sort of
okay.
look at it.
I'll leave that with you then. Yeah. Thank you. Right. Okay. Thank you. Anything else on this particular issue of flood risk and surface water and indeed water supply? No. Right. Let's move on then to the air and noise pollution was my next question. And to reflecting the national policy, the questions were, is the location site suitable for the development proposed, taking into account the likely effects of noise and pollution on the health and living conditions of future residents? And if so, would the plan be effective in helping to ensure that any potential adverse effects will be adequately mitigated? There's a map in the growth study, figure 39, that indicates, as well as the oil and gas pipelines we've been talking about, the location of those. It also shows the an ACMA area further west along the A4, but also some noise levels alongside the A4 that sort of spread into the site. So I suppose, and just looking at the numbers, this yellow area that's zoned. Have you got the map there? It shows noise class, I think, up to 59.9. Is that right? Yeah. So what does that tell us about the significance of noise along that part of the lower part of the southern part of the site? That's road traffic noise, presumably. Yeah, it's road noise, isn't it?
Yes, I'm assuming so. I just need to refamiliarise myself with it.
I suppose the question is that level of noise something that is acceptable, normal, or is it beyond the level? I think I seem to recall there are some detailed thresholds for different levels of noise in the PPG. And
yeah, I mean, I think it's an appropriate noise level. The policy requires consideration of noise, and that would impact on the design or maybe the layout of the site and things like that. It's not something that it can be mitigated. At that stage, it's not likely to cause a problem for the development.
Well, is that because that level isn't something that, I mean, this map shows that level of noise extending significant way into the developable area. If that is a noise level that is deemed to be unacceptable, and if it is, you can't, the layout presumably isn't to say you've got to go beyond that line. It would be through providing some sort of other mitigations, would it, through design measures, etc.?
I don't think it's saying that it would be unacceptable. I think it's just putting showing on the map that there is noise impact on the site and that needs to be taken into account.
Okay. I'll see if Litchfields can.
I think the answer to this, sir, is just the mechanics of how the site would be laid out. It's a practical answer in the end. If you look at the master plan that we've put in front of you, you'll see that for all sorts of reasons, levels and the need to have the balancing ponds at the foot of the hill, if you like, and then where the school goes, there aren't in fact proposed to be hardly any residential properties within that darker yellow area that you identified as 59 dB. Yeah. So the layout, I think, covers it for other reasons, really, master planning. And then in addition, obviously subject to the details coming forward, if there were the need for any mitigation at all, there's sufficient space to put mitigation close to the road in terms of bunding or anything else that may be required. But actually the 95 to 100% of this is really dealt with by the layout rather than mitigation measures.
Okay, yeah, I have seen your concept plan, and that does indicate it seemed to indicate little development there. As does the concept plan in the growth study. Okay. Right, Thatcham Town Council.
Thank you, sir. So the figure 39 doesn't give you any units for the for this class. Just doing a big Google search, the 16 hours refers to daytime, 7 a.m. till 11 p.m. But for information, the A4 has a very substantial overnight lorry traffic due to the Colthrop Estate and Thiel parks. So nighttime noise would also need to be considered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on this particular issue then? That anyone wishes to say? No. Right, what I'm going to do now
Sorry,
is.
so before,
Sorry, yeah.
before you move on,
Yeah.
just to say that the AQMA has been revoked. It was
Okay.
revoked in April this year.
And why was that?
It no longer is no longer required.
So the air quality is improved
Yes.
because the nature of the traffic?
And the measures that have been put in place by
And
the
the action
council.
plan?
Yeah.
Right, okay, which were out of interest?
I'm afraid I don't know, but we've got our air quality
No,
colleague
it's
here
okay.
if you would like some information.
I'm straying into areas I don't really need to go. It was just a matter of, okay, thank you. Right, I think what we'll do before we have a break is look at the next issue, which is about affordable housing and self-build plots, because I'm not sure this will take all that long, and then we'll have a break before I move on to some of the issues about master planning and delivery and viability, etc. We'll look at the policy SP19 because that's a policy that's generally applicable across the whole district, and the justification for that, which is basically 40% affordable housing provision on greenfield sites. And the policy for this site is 40%, it being a greenfield site. But that's obviously, that 40% is based on the viability assessment for the district as a whole. Sorry, the general one in policy SP19, yeah. Is there anything particular about this site, any site-specific evidence that suggests that more or less should be required? I mean, has the 40% been applied simply because it is a greenfield site and therefore SP19 says 40%?
That is our policy, yes.
Yeah.
That's
There's not been any further work
No.
to consider whether on this particular site, more or less could be
No,
provided?
we haven't. We've taken a standard approach. Yeah.
But we'll come on to what the viability, there is viability assessment. There's at least 2, if not 3, but it's a viability assessment specific to this site that have been done, I think, by the council and others, which I'll come on to later. But that is premised on 40%.
It is, yes.
And if there looks like there's generous viability, one of the things that could be changed would be affordable housing provision. There may be other things that have not been costed in, etc. Yeah. Okay, so but that's the starting point. It's simple application of SP19.
Yes,
yeah. If there were a larger number of homes, obviously applying 40%, you would get more affordable homes. I think it's been said, and I think the council's evidence also shows this, that if you have more homes, the viability improves. But notwithstanding that, and when the assumptions in the growth study, that still applied the 40% threshold. It didn't seek to go any higher.
No, it didn't.
No. Okay. In terms of, again, policy HOU5 and table 3 within that has got a specific mix of house types in terms of bedrooms numbers. And that again is based on a district-wide study.
Yes, that's right.
So has any analysis been done of what more locally is appropriate for Thatcham and in particular on this site?
No, it hasn't.
Okay. So it's just, again, it's a simple application of.
That's right, yes.
And the policy in here, which reflects those 2 policies. Talks about complying with the housing mix contained in table 3 of policy SP18. Okay. Right, understood. So it's the starting point is just the district-wide policies applying here. Okay. Right, Lichfield, is there anything you want to say on this?
Yes, sir, thank you. Just the last point, in a sense, it goes to our point, which is SP 17 isn't applying the policy for the district-wide housing mix policy. What it's doing is it says the mix should be table 3. It doesn't say the mix should comply with policy SP 18. And our simple point is that SP 18, as you'll see, sir, does refer to table 3 in terms of the supporting text, and then it goes on to say, or any more recent evidence published by the council, and then provides 4 criteria, A to D, for determining any variation from this mix. That flexibility, which we say is right for other housing developments in the district, under the current wording of SP 17, isn't available to North East Thatcham. Because the policy in SP 17 essentially says you go straight to the mix in the table 3, don't pass through policy SP 18. And we say there's no basis for her taking an inconsistent approach.
Okay, so the wording along that these dwellings will comprise of a housing mix in accordance with policy SP 18 or something like that.
Yeah, that would be. I believe we suggested that wording in our presentations.
Okay, any other comments on affordable housing mix? Lichfield signs up, is that just, that's been dealt with? Yeah, okay. Right, so in terms of self-build plots then, the requirement in SP 17 is for at least 3% of dwellings to be delivered via serviced custom or self-build plots. Remind me of what is there an SP or a DM policy on this?
No, I don't.
In the plan?
Hang on.
Is it under SP 17?
I'm being told there is. We're just trying to find it.
DM 18, so I believe.
DM 18, thank you. I thought that was it. Yeah, self and custom build housing. So there's no percentage requirement there on anything. So this 3% on this site is specific
Yes,
to this,
specific
and
to
I
this
think
site.
you provided some evidence about what local need, what the register is.
Yes.
And there being a demand in Thatcham specifically.
Yeah.
And your statement goes on to say, if it was 5%, so the 3% would deliver 45 self-build plots. So, and that would be below what you're saying is on the number of people registering adding to the register each year. Yeah. And you go on to say that if the requirement were modified to 5%, the maths would suggest you would get more. Why are you suggesting that?
Well, there's no intention that the site should deliver all the self-build plots that are required in the district. The self-build register gives an indication, but we don't have any criteria for joining it. There's no fee. So it is limited in what, like, sort of in terms of a genuine interest in self-build for in this area. The viability work that's done considers the 3%. It hasn't considered the 5%, which is why we're not proposing a higher level than the 3%. But we consider that the 3% provides at some sites for people for self-build and goes some way to meeting the demand that there is in the district.
Yeah, and 45 plots is, it's a significant number, isn't it? In terms of, yeah. And how would that work? Would they be in one block or would they be spread out across the 3 broad areas or whatever?
That would be it down to the master planning work that takes place and discussion with the promoters to work out how they would like to deliver that.
Okay, so the council's statement, whilst pointing a mathematical truism out, it isn't proposing a modification. You're not saying that the 3% is unsound and needs to be modified to 5%?
No, we're not.
Okay. Litchfields?
It's probably one of the least surprising remarks I'm going to make this morning, but as we say in our matter statement, it's self-evident that at 3%, you get more at 2,500 than you do at 1,500.
More math truisms.
I aim to please.
And presumably you get 5% of 1,500 is more than 3% of 1,500.
I'll take your word for that, but the
It's 5% of 1,500 more than 3% of 2,000.
as the council very correctly mentioned, there's no testing of 5%.
Yeah, okay. But there's no, that in terms of your approach to this site, you don't see a practical or a viability problem to providing those plots?
No, and the NPPF policy is very clear about the requirements on authorities to grant enough permissions
Yeah. And presumably there'd be mechanisms in place, would there, that if you can't sell those plots at some point, they get turned over to market housing provided by the developer, is that?
Yes, that's right. So it's usually dealt with in the 106 on the permissions, and there's usually a cascade with time limits and marketing, etc.
Okay, but that detail's not needed in here.
Not in
the principle of the 3% is accepted. Okay, Vincent's Lane.
Thank you, sir. Unless I'm mistaken, I can't actually find anywhere where the 3% has been tested. So in the Dixon Searle viability appraisal, it talks about self and custom build generally across the borough at paragraph at page 55, where it talks about it being cost neutral in broad terms. But unless I've missed it, and I could well have done, I can't see it anywhere in the testing, which for a precise figure of 3%, I'd be quite surprised about.
Okay, I mean, I'd identified, I think there's 3 bits of the viability work, as far as I understand it. There's the one that's been provided by Litchfields, and that's included within your matter for statement.
That's right, the Turner Moore work.
Yeah, and then there was some assessment done in the growth study, which I kind of summarised in my notes in the preamble to one of the questions here. And then there's the local plan review viability assessment, which is the BIA documents in the examination library. So the 3 bits of work that I've looked at, I mean, we'll come on to what they say generally, but specifically where you say the 3% was factored in, maybe I can just park this for now and you can clarify it later when we talk about it.
Yeah, I need to clarify it.
Yeah, okay. To pick up the point that was raised there. Any observations from the town council about self-build and custom build? No? Okay, thank you. Right. Okay, thank you for that. Unless there's any other.
Could I just add one point? Forgive me.
Yeah.
So we can come back to this if necessary when we're dealing with viability. Mr. Hegan is here for us from Turner Moore on that later. But just on that point on self-build and whether it has any material effect on the viability appraisal, certainly that we've done, and we also, having had a look at it, think the same is true of the Dixon Searle work. It just washes through. It doesn't really affect materially the overall parameters of the viability exercise, that small amount.
Based on roughly 3%.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Right, what we'll do now is have a break until 11:15, and then we'll move on to issue 4.14, which is about the master planning and the strategic growth study, etc. So, thank you. Okay, it's 11:15 or a little after again, so we will resume if we could please. So we're moving on to issue 4.14 now, which deals with the master planning process essentially, but also the references to the Thatcham and strategic growth study. And then we'll deal with sort of issues around the timing, development, deliverability, viability, etc. separately. So we're looking just at this master planning process that's described in policy SP 17. The sort of the background to this is, or the context is the first paragraph of policy SP 17, which the council has proposed some modifications to. So it would now talk about the delivery of a comprehensive residential-led urban extension, comprising of distinct neighbourhoods. And then it talks about the master planning being in collaboration with the community and other stakeholders to provide a framework to guide development. And the proposals must have regard to this and demonstrate how it has guided proposals in a positive manner. And then it goes on to say proposal must also demonstrate how the provision of all infrastructure services, open space and facilities will be delivered in a timely and coordinated way. So that seems to be tightening up this whole approach to achieving comprehensive development, coordinating the timing of different elements of the scheme and through a master planning process, and bringing in the bit more information about how the master planning would work in terms of collaboration with the community and other stakeholders. So I can understand the thinking behind that. The other element of this modification to the first paragraph would be deletion of the reference in the policy to the Thatcham strategic growth study. So taking it out of policy and including it, referring to it in the reason justification as part of the evidence-based justification for the policy, along with the West Berkshire strategic vision, which we've already talked about. Okay, so that's all understood from my point of view. In terms of the Thatcher strategic growth study and what paragraph 6.54 says about it, can we just have a look at that, please? It refers to the study being commissioned in 2020, and it then goes on to refer specifically to stage 3, which is the sort of the proposals, if you like. I can't remember what it's called now, the stage 3, but it's and anyway, it goes on to say that the stage 3 report lays out a potential vision and approach to strategic growth in Thatcham. So is that Thatcham as a town, not just this site, is that what that's referring to?
No, it's referring to this site being the strategic growth in Thatcham, as opposed to any other development.
Right, okay. And it intended to inform the decision-making process of the local plan review in choosing suitable allocation sites across the district as a whole. It seemed to be a funny description of what that stage 3 of the study did, which my reading of the stage 3 study was it's about, it's the first sort of broad approach to sort of master planning the site in a very high level way.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So
I think that, yeah, something there doesn't quite make sense. So I think we need to revisit that one.
No, okay. I think that needs a bit of thought. But then the study goes on, it refers to it being based on a larger quantum of development than proposed through this policy. But then it goes on to say, however, the guiding principles continue to remain relevant. And again, I suppose we're back to what you mean by what are guiding principles clear in the stage 3 study? And if so, are they intended to be, I think, specificity beyond what's in policy SP 17, or are they reflected in SP 17 and now we're moving on to something else? I can't quite understand what it's trying to say. So do you want to just maybe explain what you think it's trying to say, and then we'll see what others think about that.
So the specific requirements are in the policy. This provides some sort of background information, some detail. It talks about, it's done some background studies and background work. So it talks about, where you might be able to look at protecting tree lines, green and blue infrastructure, locations for those, that sort of thing. But based on that, this was based on a larger scale of development. So to recognise that, we're saying it's not the master plan, but the principles within it in terms of how you could develop the site are still relevant because of what they're talking about in terms of strategic development on the site.
Well, I'd have thought the principles would be reflected in SB 17.
They are, yes.
I think maybe what you're saying is that some of the detailed analysis and evidence and information that was used to inform that study may still be relevant, as
Yes.
opposed to any sort of principles or policy implications or anything like that. Is that?
Yes.
I think that's
I think
maybe
that's
what you're saying,
correct,
really.
yes.
So it's the information, the evidence, the analysis, more factual stuff
Yes.
that's been done.
That's right, yes.
It is still relevant.
Yes.
Because the landscape is essentially the same and
Yes,
the trees and hedgerows are in the same places and these sort of
Yes,
things.
That's right.
And
yes.
technical stuff is still, some of it might need updating or something. So, okay, understood. So I think on that basis, that does need maybe rejigging to move away from the idea that somehow it's the first bit of master planning, as you say, that's relevant now to this site, as opposed to it containing sort of, as I say, technical work that's some of which is relevant. Okay, thank you for that. The modification refers to residential-led development. Actually, it refers to a residential-led urban extension. But what is meant by residential-led? Does it have any? Is it to do with timing? Is it to do with importance?
I think it's to do with what the main aim of the site is, to deliver residential growth to the edge of Thatcham, but supported by the infrastructure that is needed for that development.
But as we kind of we discussed yesterday, one of the rationales for this whole strategic site approach, I thought, was to, yes, provide the infrastructure that's needed to support this scale of development, but also to address some issues, current capacity issues with some of the social infrastructure that exists in the town. And that's right still, yeah. I mean, specifically to do with the GP practices and health centres and secondary school provision, I think.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay, so I suppose, well, okay, you can think about that. I'll think about that. It's like whether the emphasis on residential led is actually what you're saying in this particular case, or whether it is, you know, it's something it's not actually, well, it's residential led in one sense, I understand, but I just think it just sort of raises an issue that you're thinking about what's the most important element of the scheme. Okay. In terms of the master planning, moving on then to actually what it says about the master planning process. The site will be master planned. Well, it's a passive statement. Who is going to be doing the master planning?
It's our intention that would be done by the consortium or the applicant who are wishing to, you know, so they would lead on it, but in collaboration with the council and the local community and other stakeholders who would need to be involved in that. Okay. Right, so it's the responsibility of the developer. The council is not going to commission and prepare a master plan for which, you know, it's a collaborative process with the council's involvement, but paid for and led by the
applicants.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of collaboration with the community and stakeholders, what does that mean in practice? Does that mean some sort of ongoing process and using what sort of forums and mechanisms?
At the minute, I don't think we have sort of worked that out. That would be a discussion between the developer and the council to work out how that collaboration would best take place. But we do have existing forums which could be used. It could be workshops with the community. There's a number of different options that could happen to get that collaboration. But at the moment, there's no sort of specific requirements as to how that would be delivered. But to be meaningful, it needs to obviously be able to influence the outcome of that. I mean, I think the planning application is already in preparation, isn't it? That's my understanding, but I understand that's also for a higher number than what's in the plan. Yeah, okay. Well, we'll come on to other views about this. But so the principle is collaboration, understood, and that it would be, there's a sequence. Well, is there a sequence here? Is there an expectation that
some sort of master plan document would be agreed by the council before an application is prepared?
That is how we would like it to be done. And we would like to have that master plan agreed prior to a planning application. Because then that would inform what goes into that planning application, and we would know that the community had been involved and included in those discussions and had a say on what was on the site, where it was, and the details.
Yeah. So the logical sequence would be the developer leads on this master planning process, collaborating with you and the local community somehow, and then the council would agree the master plan before an application is, well, certainly before it's determined, but ideally from the council point of view, before the application is even prepared and submitted. Or,
Yes, that would be what we'd wish to see.
and would the master plan be formally adopted, formally approved by the council?
I don't think we've got to the stage of quite working out how it would be agreed. As to whether that would be, it would be agreed, but
the council would agree it.
Yes, but the mechanism for that has not yet been determined.
Okay. One of the mechanisms could be, it would be formally approved as SPD.
That is one of the options, yes.
Yeah. And that would then, does that, to be SPD, do you have to go through some consultation process?
I believe so, yes. There is it would be, it's,
that would be, there'd be collaboration during the preparation of this thing, but it would be another,
and then there'd be
if that was a
consultation.
way of doing it, that would be one mechanism.
Yes,
All this obviously would add time to the process.
it does, yes.
But also before you get to a master plan being worked up, you've got numerous bits of work that are referred to in policy SP 17, usually called strategies of one sort or another. So those would all have to be done to inform the master planning process, yeah?
The work on them would have to have started, yes.
Yeah, well,
it would be done sort of at the same time, I would anticipate.
But the way that these are referred to, there's no process of the council agreeing these strategies formally.
No, those would be the strategies. We'd expect to see the strategy at planning application stage. We wouldn't necessarily expect to see that beforehand.
Other than they would need to be done to inform the master planning.
Yes, they would be included in that, but in terms of actually what's included in them, the details, that would be reviewed at the planning application stage.
Okay. So the partnerships statement that describes an application being prepared. It also includes a concept master plan, which you may or may not have looked at. I don't know. I mean, it's been referred to. I have looked at it, but it doesn't have any, from your point of view, that is not, well, it may feed into this master planning process if this plan were to be adopted and whatever, but that is not anything that has any status at this stage.
Not at this stage, and I understand it's for a higher number than the policy is requiring. Therefore, it's not. It could be a starting point, but it wouldn't be the master plan for this policy because the numbers are not the same.
Okay. So I suppose a number of issues there about whether policy needs to have further clarity to describe that sort of sequential type approach, and maybe two things really. One, the sequence of when things should happen that you've just described, and two, that there has to be some council agreement to, I suppose, at some point. And I think what you're saying, the point would be the master plan rather than the individual strategies. So obviously you have to approve the planning application, but the other key thing would be the master plan.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Right. Okay. Anything else you want to say on that?
No, nothing.
No. Well, sorry, just going back to the council's experience in these things previously. I mean, for example, Sandalford Park, there was an SPD produced for that. That policy went back to the core strategy, didn't it? I think.
Yes, it did.
So have there been other strategic sites that the council has?
No, that was the first one.
That was the first one. So that was a number of years ago, but that, I don't know what the policy was at the time, but presumably there was a similar sort of process that went on. It was a developer-led process that led to a formal SPD being approved by the council.
Yes, that's correct.
And that was an SPD that was in its essence prepared by.
It was prepared in collaboration with the developer. The council, I think, prepared the SPD itself, but the detail and the master planning work was done, funded by the developer.
Right. And then that was approved a number of years ago.
That's correct. Yes.
And well, for whatever reasons, we can talk about some for part tomorrow, can't we? But that did inform, or was, if it didn't, if it was still relevant, inform the planning applications that
Yes,
followed.
that's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Right. I think let me get some initial thoughts from Litchfields from what we've heard in terms of your views on what the policy actually says and
Yes.
what you've heard that the council has in mind.
Yes. Three different groups of points that are just going back. So first of all, to what you and the council were saying about the modification on paragraph 6.63, which I think is on page 31 of the mods document. So that was the point we made in our representations about who would produce the master plan. And you in your later question, you said by whom, but that wording, which has got the additional based on existing evidence and information underlined. So if you've got that, amending paragraph 6.63. It's the one that says amend 663, and the additions are the bits underlined, but the bit that isn't underlined includes a coherent master plan which will be produced in collaboration and so on. Now, we raised the point in our representations that's not clear about the process and by whom. The council's confirmed our preferred option, which is that the partnership would produce the master plan. In terms of mechanics and involvement of all the relevant stakeholders, the word collaboration, I think you identified, said does the trick. If that's in policy and the process run, if you like, by the partnership hasn't been properly collaborative, then it won't comply with the policy. So that there's some teeth there, if you like, on the wording as that's already there in the drafting. So it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that to achieve proper collaboration and input from others. So that's the first point. The second point, so it just comes to those questions you were asking the council about how the third stage of the Thatcham growth strategy is dealt with in the wording and clarification around what's meant by principles and so on of that document. I mean, I think actually just hearing what was said on behalf of the council, the difficulty with those words which you were probing is kind of scar tissue, if you like, from the change of the evidence base to the lower number. And that's why it doesn't really make sense at the moment, and why, with respect to the comments that were made about principles just being kind of input and evidence and so on, that doesn't really work either, because the evidence base, including the growth strategy, stage 3, isn't just initial master planning, but it's part, on the council's own case, as I understand it, of explaining why this is the right strategic site, the right location, because it can do X, Y, and Z, including not just washing its own face, but meeting other objectives and so on. So it's rather more than just kind of early, the principle having been accepted, an early stage of the master planning. And that's why it refers to principles, because it goes wider than just inputs. So I think whilst one could recast the wording of that to change its meaning, really, to accord, if you like, with the 1500, actually, it should stay as it is, because the number should go up again. So I won't repeat that, but that's how that connects to our main gripe, if you like, about the policy. And then the third point, just on the process, that was all quite new, obviously. So that the discussion you had about the process and agreeing the master plan before the application. So obviously we may have to think as a team a little bit more about that, but our initial reaction is negative to that for partly reasons that you explored already, sir. The first point is that if you have a master plan process which has to be finalised by a decision by the council before an application can be made, see Sandalford Park, where it took 3 years for the SPD to be agreed before anything could happen in terms of the application. Then you add in a significant, I won't say very significant, but a significant delay to the site coming forward, which is difficult in terms of delivery and what's been assumed by way of trajectory. I know things can go on in parallel, but if that's a stop on the application process, then that is a distinct negative. Secondly, if you have a master plan that's been agreed and then you make the application, it makes changes and amendments in response to consultation responses that people may make on the application perfectly reasonably. I mean, difficult to do because they may then not be in accordance with the master plan. And the answer to that isn't they should all come out in the master planning process, because things change over time, as we know. And people, statutory consultees and stakeholders in the area may well have another issue which has matured over time, which they want to raise and which should be taken into account in the application process, which wasn't able to be taken into account in the master planning process. So significant delay, too inflexible, makes amendments difficult. And also here, we don't, our initial reaction to what's being suggested, sir, is given all of the things that you've got already in the policy, unnecessary to introduce into the policy a procedural stage, a new step, which requires a master plan to be agreed in the end by the council before the application can happen. And there's plenty of experience, not just Sandalwood Park, with the long-running SPD process, but elsewhere in this region. West Oxfordshire is a good example, where West Oxfordshire took the same approach to agreeing master plans for the strategic sites in that area. Years and years and years have passed since that was put into the plan, and it's still bedeviling the applications on all those main sites. So we don't think it's a very good idea at all, and we would need obviously to have much further extensive further discussions with the council to firm up any details on that. But that's our initial reactions.
Yeah, understood. On that one then, so you'd be happy with the policy as it is, implicit, I suppose, in it, that the council, the council, it doesn't even say the council would agree the master plan, but you'd say that it's sufficiently implicit in it that would have to be part of the process.
Yes.
Because it wouldn't approve the planning application unless it was happy with the master plan.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed.
Okay.
But that could be done in parallel with and as part of, as has currently been up to now been discussed as part of the application. Sorry.
Yeah. So if I thought it needed to be more explicit, I mean, an alternative would be if the master plan to be agreed by the council as part of the planning application process would be. It would be.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it would be okay.
And that's the basis upon which we've been progressing up until about half an hour ago. Yeah.
In terms of going back then to your second point about the Thatcham strategic growth study, I understand that if I were to agree that the plan needs to be modified to refer to 2,500, then reference to the study providing relevant principles or something of that nature may be more appropriate than it is at the moment.
Yes.
If, on the other hand, the plan is to propose 1,500, the best that I think what the council's saying, the best that you could extract from the growth study would be some of the factual analysis and information that would then inform the master planning.
I think that's right. I mean, I think the original purpose of and content of the paragraph would be OTOs really, you just have to rewrite.
So actually, when you referred to 6.63,
yes,
with the modification, when it talks about the master plan process based on existing evidence and information already produced to support the allocation, including the growth study, that would cover it. That would say there's bits of relevant information and evidence in there that is relevant now to.
Yes, that particular change there to 663 is fine and would be fine on either basis in terms of the numbers, because it's about the master plan process.
And it's talking about not principles but evidence and information.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. I'll move around to Nexus.
Thank you, sir. From my experience of large sites, they fall into two camps in local plans. Some strategic sites in the local plan have quite a lot of detail in terms of framework master plans. A lot of due diligence is done at the early stages, for example, looking at locations and scale of local centres, primary schools, more details of open space, and they're articulated in probably appendices to the local plan showing a framework master plan. In this instance, we have very little in the policy to direct development. In fact, after the last few days, a great deal of ambiguity about a number of things relating to the suitability of public transport with 1,500 houses, the secondary school, etc. There's a lot of ambiguity. And from my experience, where you have policies where there's more ambiguity, it's completely correct for the council to require an SPD to provide some level of control from a council's perspective. Specifically in the instance where you've got numerous landowners, because whilst the North East Thatcham Consortium are all aligned at this point, I'm talking as one, as a single application. From experience, as we all know, things can change. And having an SPD, it's the council's document, it's their adopted document, and they can control the development on the whole site in a way that's been agreed and been through an open consultation process with the public and endorsed by members. So it provides a material consideration for determining applications, which both the developers would have to adhere to and indeed members have to take account of. I don't think it extends significantly. Mr. Warren mentioned West Oxfordshire, and there was a specific SPD in West Oxfordshire for Garden Village, which took an inordinate amount of time. In the neighbouring district of Wokingham, they've got a lot of experience on strategic sites. They've had four strategic sites, all were accompanied by an SPD, which is now being used to direct specifics of the development. They've also required through policy in Wokingham a master plan. That master plan is a finer grain document that takes the SPD one step forward to show how specific phases within the overall site can integrate effectively. So you have an SPD setting out a framework at a high level, and then a master plan to accompany the planning application to show how all the parcels can integrate effectively. There's absolutely no reason why that process can't happen here. A lot of work's been done already in the Thatcham study to provide some principles for that SPD. The consortium have produced a lot of master planning work already. Giving the council control through an SPD, I think, is the most effective way of this policy being implemented, sir.
Okay, so in your suggested model there, you would get this policy, which you say is fairly high level in the plan. Subsequent to that, an SPD would be produced and agreed by the council.
Yes, sir. And in the process of the SPD, I mean, I've produced SPDs on behalf of my clients for the council, so it can be funded and produced by the consortium.
Yeah.
But the council have control over it and an input into it, and there's a statutory process that go through to consult on it.
Yeah.
To engage the community, for example, in a formal way, rather than slightly more ad hoc way of a developer taking the initiative and engaging with the community.
And then, so that SPD would not be the end of the master planning process, because further master planning under that approach would take place in accordance with the SPD, or having regard to the SPD, and worked up through the planning application.
Yes, the master plan would be formed part of the application.
Yeah. Okay, understood. And in terms of the Wokingham approach, so those 4 strategic sites, so were those sites subject to policies in an adopted plan?
Yes.
And then an SPD followed?
The policy required an SPD to be produced for all the strategic development areas, and they were produced pretty quickly. I mean, the process of the SPDs in Wokingham took about a year to produce the SPDs and get them adopted. And what happened with the Wokingham sites is the developers started to prepare applications. Once the SPD had gone through the consultation process, they had enough certainty to start to prepare the applications.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so different models, different approaches. And as you say, the alternative in some plans is actually to include in effect the SPD in the policy, because enough work's been done to be able to set that out. Well, it's not SPD, but it's sort of the level of detail that you may get in a SPD is included actually in the adopted plan.
I think that's the alternative, where you have a red line boundary, policy boundary, but there's some appendix showing a framework master plan, which because
broad layout and
layout where the schools are going to go, where the accesses are going to go, where the open space is configured.
Yeah. Okay, which is sort of what was being edged towards with this developable area and access points and things here, but well, we've had discussions about that. So
I think it's work in progress, sir, on that.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Understood. Okay. Thank you. Bucklebury Parish Council.
Thank you, sir. I think there's a lot that we've heard here that gives us a lot of cause for concern. I think in terms of what the council were talking to you about in that process and master planning, is welcomed, but that's not what the policy is telling you. And that's not what any of the modifications are giving you any comfort in the way that that process would actually work. And I think really in terms of why a master plan approach or an SPD approach would be necessary, well, the reason it's necessary is that because there's so much unresolved, and you should reflect on what you've heard over this last 2 days on matters of infrastructure, on matters of education, on healthcare, on transport, and all of those matters that are wholly unresolved as part of this. And that is why that approach is necessary as part of a modification of this policy. To have an approach that process is somehow brought alongside an application would be wholly unsatisfactory, because what would be the point in doing that? Because you've already set everything out within a planning application, even if it was an outline application, those matters will have been set. So to have then a master planning process where you're consulting a community and asking them what they think, that would be a ludicrous process to go through at that point, we say, sir. So it is absolutely necessary to have that within that policy, and to modify it further to be clear on the sequence that that's going to come about. Because at the moment, as this policy sits, the Thatcham Partnership could feasibly come forward with 2,500 units, and it could feasibly be allowed, because there's just so much ambiguity. And it requires that further policy within that to make that very clear, and the sequencing of that very clear. And it's simply not at the moment. And I think also that, we won't repeat on it, but the references to the Thatcham strategic growth study within that give us cause for concern. I won't rehearse that. But again, if you were content that you were going to find this sound, I think to have a policy which talks about 1,500 units, but then refers, even in the amplification text and the justification text, to a growth study that talks about 1,000 more units than that, it, again, is just a contradiction. There is some principles, and there are some good principles in that growth study. We recognise that, but those are actually in the earlier stages, stage 1 and 2. So you could strip out stage 3 and say that needs to be rerun, and effectively you would be providing a new stage 3 or a stage 4, whatever you want to call it, of the Thatcham strategic growth study, which works within that development boundary that you've got in front of you, that works within the 1,500 units, that works with all the things that you've been told today. But that process needs to happen before an application is submitted.
Understood. So your model would be something along the lines suggested by Nexus, i.e. the policy would be clear that the next step would be an SPD.
Yeah.
And then any detailed master planning and planning applications would follow on once that's been formally approved by the council.
Absolutely. And Mr. Warren's right. These things can take time. They can cause delay, but they don't have to be done well. These things can be done quickly and collaboratively. An approach that had a master plan alongside an application would not be collaborative.
Yeah, undergone the point.
And then the other thing, I think, with just these issues that we've got, again, you rightly picked it up, sir, residential-led urban extension. The placing of that within that is completely at odds with what we know needs to happen on this site of infrastructure-led and the timing of that. So again, there's you were right to raise it. We endorse that, sir. I did have another point.
I think in terms of residential-led or infrastructure-led, I think the point is it's neither. It's coordination between the different components of the scheme, I think, is the point. I suppose you've articulated it in a way that's, I mean, there may be good reasons why some of the infrastructure is early, as we've already heard, but it's about the coordination between the different elements that I thought is not giving an impression that something leads and the other follows.
Yeah, and it's about coordination with those infrastructure providers as well. And as we've heard in the last couple of days, there's much work to do on that.
Okay, thank you. Thatcham Town Council.
Thank you, sir. So I won't repeat the comments made by Bucklebury Parish Council, though I agree with them. So firstly, I welcome the removal of the reference to the Thatcham Strategic Growth Study from the policy itself. I'll come back to its insertion elsewhere. And I welcome the concept of collaboration with the community. However, sir, you will have seen in our representations that the Thatcham Strategic Growth Study misrepresents what actually happened, and there was no consultation with the council as a council whatsoever. And we'd be worried about that happening again. While not being a planning professional, the descriptions that have been given to the process for an SPD would appear to give the degree of formality and transparency that would give a lot of reassurance not only to the town council but to the community. And you're no doubt aware of, I think, over the period, many thousands of representations over the various stages of the process. So that would give that transparency. Turning to the new references to the Thatcham Strategic Growth Study, we are very concerned with the words guiding principles. They do not appear anywhere in the document itself, and the word principles appears throughout, right from the stage of the so-called community workshop. So it is impossible to determine from that which parts of the document are relevant and which are not. So I would suggest, therefore, in fact, the Town Council did suggest that a reference to the Strategic Growth Study in paragraph 6.63 would be appropriate. And having added it there, it's not clear why it's also necessary in paragraph 6.58, because what it describes there is effectively a 6.54. Because a large part of that is, in fact, a description of history, not of the policy itself. And it's not, I don't think it's customary for local plans to describe the history of the generation of the evidence base. So suggest there that we limit the reference, if it's needed at all, to 6.63, and one might add a description that only some parts of that are now relevant due to the change in the number of dwellings that are proposed. So I think that probably covers the points in addition to what Bucklebury Parish Council has already said. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Right, back to North East Thatcham Partnership.
Thank you, sir. We've been listening to those points, and also given how the point about sequencing an SPD emerged. Obviously, we're continuing to reflect on hearing that discussion taking place this morning. This point about the process and the stages and so on is hugely important, and as a balance we would say needs to be struck when you're thinking about this between proper engagement and the objectives being reached of it being the site and the scheme being planned properly, and effective delivery. And we say that if one was to insert an SPD stage or the requirement for a master plan to be agreed before the application was made, that would not be effective, which is a soundness test. So we say that it's a slightly moving target because it's not in there at the moment, so it's not in our written reps, but we say that if that were to be added, that would run the risk of introducing something that would not be sound. And so I'll just make a couple of additional points, just reflecting on what's been said since our original contribution on this. It's slight mixed messages, it seemed to us, from Mr. Tustain on this point, because a lot of work, as he said, has been done. I think that was his expression. The DLA work, other work by the council, and a lot of work, obviously, by the partnership. So we're not in a position that there are huge areas that are unresolved. That's simply not the case, as you've heard over the past day and a half. There are some areas that are not resolved. But important though they are, they're by no means the majority. So that is a mischaracterization, I think, of where we are. In terms of having an SPD, you don't need an SPD or a master plan, which has to be agreed first, to resolve any unresolved areas or ambiguity. And I think obviously the answer to this, you'll forgive me for saying, but it is relevant to the point. There wouldn't be any ambiguity or unresolved issues, public transport, education, delivery, and so on, with the higher number. So our points are all, the evidence base doesn't support the delivery of those effectively at 1,500. So if you were to agree with us that the number should be higher as the evidence base shows, those points that we've raised go away. So the unresolved areas that Mr. Tustain was referring to. The other points are already covered largely by the evidence. But in terms of whether the SPD is necessary or not to achieve the proper outcome and to be effective, there's just no doubt that it would cause substantial delay. Now, Wokingham was mentioned, so I don't know whether you've got any personal experience of Wokingham. Several of the developers involved in those sites are sitting behind me because they're part of the North East Thatcham consortium. And those SPDs took a similar amount of time. One of them to the south of the motorway is still grumbling on. So we're still talking about years of additional process to achieve an objective which we say can be adequately and properly achieved, elaboration, etc., and proper master planning through the process that was originally inserted into the plan. In other words, as part of the ongoing work in the application procedure. What nobody wants, I'm sure, is to trade a more formal procedure for years of additional delay if all of those things can properly be dealt with as part of the application process. And they can, because the council will decide, if the policy wording stays as we've been discussing, whether the collaboration process, which they can obviously influence in a significant degree, is carried out properly or not. So if they feel that it hasn't been or isn't being, and the meetings and the way that the points being made have not been taken on board properly, then that is going to be a fatal problem for the application itself. And the partnership would obviously want to avoid that. So there is an inbuilt safeguard in, as I said before, in the word collaboration. And as I say, the point of delay, so you'll come back to this when you're thinking about overall trajectory and delivery. And you've got the council's case on when they want and expect units to be delivered from this site. If you factor in the kind of delay or time, I should say, the additional time that would be taken for that stage, that begins to look highly questionable. And so you'd need to bear that in mind and ask whether that is the right balance to trade that unnecessary additional stage against actually getting these housing and affordable housing units built.
Yes, understood. So thank you. That's from Town Council.
Thank you, sir. I don't understand one aspect of the comment made by the North East Action Partnership as the critical point being when the planning application is made. Surely the critical point is when the planning application is granted, because that's when the work started. And the two are only related if they assume that the planning application that they make in the process that they prefer would inevitably be granted. I also have worries about their assumption that a planning application could be refused on the basis of the collaboration, particularly as the degree of collaboration is somewhat vague. And as I've already referred to, the view of the Town Council on the collaboration on the strategic growth study is diametrically opposed to the description that's given in the document itself. So we're not confident that without a formal process, which an SPD would give, that this could be enforced and would result in the proper degree of community and public engagement. Thank you.
Anything further? I've got the basic sides of the argument.
You have the points, sir, but I think two things. Obviously, being told that 2,500 units, all these problems go away. Well, don't fall for that. There's a lot of problems here. I'm sure you know about those and have got those all noted. But equally, in terms of an SPD, if that's done well, and it can be done well and collaboratively with infrastructure, that would actually make an application process easier and quicker. It should do. But the issue is going in with an application now with those issues unresolved, that would just cause delays in the application process. So yes, that could take some time to do an SPD, but it needn't take a huge amount of time if it's done collaboratively and well. But equally, it would save you time at the back end as well, I would have said.
Okay, thank you. Right. Any further thoughts from the council at this stage? You've heard, I suppose we'll come on to the trajectory shortly, and there may be some further work I want to explore. I want you to do exploring how two different possible processes could impact on trajectory, taking account of some of the things that we've heard. But I'll deliberate on that, and we've got some further discussion now. But just this principle, I suppose, of the balance between the priority of getting this right and the necessity of getting development started as soon as possible. It's you know, I'm sure you'd say both things are important, but you know, someone's got to make a judgment about that. And I suppose it may not be you now sat there right this minute, but it may be something that you need to think about as an authority, really, because ultimately it affects soundness. But there could be other remedies to the effect on soundness in terms of trajectory overall for the district in terms of housing, because there's other ways of delivering, you know, of affecting that there's other potential ways of affecting that trajectory. So I'll leave that with you just to sort of, you know, you don't need to respond to that now. But is there anything specific that you've heard in terms of the timings of the SPD and anything like that you've heard?
Nothing particular. I mean, I think we anticipate that master planning work could be done quite quickly. So we don't, you know, a lot of the background work is there.
Yeah.
It's actually, you know, that collaboration with the local community, getting their input. And we anticipate that could be done quite quickly to get that master plan agreed.
So the key point from your point of view would be not necessarily, but it could be the SPD process, but the council agreeing it.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And the master planning there didn't need to be two separate processes. The SPD coming first, and then a subsequent master planning process.
No, I mean, we're interested in the master planning, and how that then is adopted or you know, agreed is a different thing that we need to go away and look at. But it's, you know, actually having a master plan that has been produced in collaboration with the community and that we can agree on a certain level is the thing that we think can be done and is important to get done.
Right at the beginning, when we first spoke and before we had contribution of others, you said that you're, whilst it's not set out, I think you said ideally you would agree the master plan before the application is submitted.
Yes, that's correct.
So that it's a clear point that you've agreed something that then the application follows on. So that's, if there's one key thing about this, that's it at this point in time.
That's it, yes.
It's not that would have to be formally adopted as SPD necessarily.
No, it could just be agreed with the council.
Understood. Okay. Right, okay. Thank you for that. Anything else on this issue then before we look at the trajectory and the viability type issues?
Can I just make one final point?
Of course, yeah.
Just one final point, because it is, the more we think about it, the more slight trouble we are by it. I think you've asked the council to consider things like impact on programme and trajectory, and so I'm sure they will be in the light of this discussion. But you all have, without making a song and a dance about it, you'll have noted that all of the council's representations on this point have been about the master planning as part of the application, in parallel with the application. So when you go back to their written work on this, not there should be a stage put in the policy which says master plan first and then only application afterwards, let alone SPD first. But anyway, that's for the council to consider. But when they are considering it, just listening to what has just been said on behalf of the council, that they're interested really in the master plan, and ideally we'd agree the master plan before it's before the application is submitted. There are downsides, and experience shows this, for LPAs as well as applicants in requiring every I to be dotted and T to be crossed on a master plan before the application is submitted. Because things inevitably, things small and big, change during potentially 6 to 12 months of the application being determined. Yes, statutory consultees are late, all sorts of things change. Obviously in this world of, let's put it mildly, non-static national policy, things change over 6 months to 12 months. And so it's actually a rod for the council's back as well as the appellants, if you have to have everything parcelled up before the application is made. So a degree of flexibility is good for everybody. I just ask, Sir, through you, if you like the council to reflect on that in their final position.
Okay, noted. I think we've taken this as far as we can for now. It's, I think I've got it's been a helpful discussion. And I mean, I'm not my reading of what you've said there is that it was always assumed by you, certainly, and you say by the council, that the master planning would be in parallel with the application. It was never clear to me, and hence my questions and the discussion that we've had, and looking at the pros and cons of these different approaches, I understand what they are.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Well, my understanding of the planning process is that once a planning application is made, that the council can have further discussions, but the public can only comment on the plan as submitted.
Okay.
And therefore that public consultation effectively ceases at that point. Thank you.
Yeah, so I understand the point. You know, the meaningful input would be before an application's worked up. I clearly understood. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so the next issue, 415, is about viability and delivery. As I've already referred, I'll talk about coordinating and phasing delivery, I think, following on from what we've just said, and leave viability. We've touched on viability already, and we know there's 3 bits of viability work that is all telling us broadly the same thing, I think, which is the site can be viably developed. There's some issues about the scale of development and what the possible implications of that are. So I'll come on to that later. But taking the policy as it is, as the modifications, and in terms of the coordinating and phasing delivery, this goes back to the master planning process and things we've just talked about, really, I think, because the policy has been strengthened in terms of the necessity for coordination and then introducing a phasing element to it. That would be informed by the master plan. And potentially the phasing could be things like trigger points for particular bits of infrastructure being provided and certain things happening linked to X number of homes being built or occupied or whatever. That's the sort of mechanism, yeah? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
So in that sense, leaving aside the big issue about how you determine all that in the master planning SPD process, that's a sort of more detailed thing that can be dealt with
Yes,
once it's all agreed that you know what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, we'd expect phasing, detailed phasing to be done at the planning application stage. We wouldn't expect that to be done before that.
And there's tools to, you know, planning conditions and legal agreements, etc., that can be used to do that.
Yes, it's quite a standard process to have those things.
Okay. So let me move on to the what your trajectory indicates and the timings of. I haven't got it actually before me now. Do you want to just talk me through what you've got at the present time, and then
just need to get it up.
Yeah, you get it up as well. Yeah, I meant to bring a note of it, but I don't think I have. It's in the latest. What's the latest?
It's
position?
exam 22, sir, which proposes 20 completions in 28, 29.
Okay. What document should I be looking at for the latest position that you've got set out? Is it the amended trajectory that's?
So we're just checking the reference to give you the right one. So this is set from exam 22. My colleague's done the trajectory, so I'll get her to come and sit here just in case there's any specific questions about
Okay, let's just broadly talk through that as a starting point. So that's in that exam 22. Is that the what's the title of that document? I forgot which one it is now.
Let me just check. It's in the response to IN 11.
Okay, and that's in the form of is that the table that sets out the dates?
Yes,
and the number of dwellings under each of those dates?
Yes.
Okay. Well, do you want to? So what's just give me the headline figures that you've got, and I'm going to talk about what Litchfield's statement suggests as well. So
yeah. So it's my understanding these figures are based on what we've been provided from the developer.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're suggesting the trajectory suggests 20 dwellings in 28, 29. No, sorry, wrong one, 29, 30, and then 160 dwellings a year for the remainder of the plan period.
Yeah, okay. So starting 2029, 30. Okay. Fine.
Sorry, so no, starting 28, 29 at 20 dwellings, the following year, so 29, 30, 140 dwellings, and then 160 for the remainder of the period. So I was looking at the wrong line.
Okay, so from the 140, 160 a year, that would be how many outlets on the site then? Or is that a question I'll have to ask?
That's a question you'd have to ask.
It'd be several anyway, wouldn't it?
I anticipate it'd be more than one.
Yeah, well,
You know,
yes.
I think they might, yes,
Okay.
there's several
Okay.
within that.
And in terms of, you say that you've used that based on what the information you've been given. Have you done any analysis of the lead-in time or, you know, to development starting in 28, 29? Have you thought that through, or is that just something that you've not really addressed?
No, so because we don't have sufficient information for strategic sites, so we don't have any like lead-in time or build-up rates, district-wide analysis on that.
Okay, so I'll come on to what Lichfield say. What we do have from, and it's been referred to by some participants I know, and Lichfields often refer to it themselves as their start to finish work, which there's been various iterations of now, and I've certainly looked at it in the past. I don't know what the latest one I think is a recent one, is it from this year, Mr. Spry?
Yes, there's one earlier this year.
Yeah, so that's looking at strategic sites in various parts of the country, and it sets out from past experience going over several years now, I'd imagine, because certainly you've produced it a number of times, haven't you?
Yeah, we've been at it a while. Yeah, so when the key thing actually, particularly when we dug into the latest iteration, is actually it shows the danger of averages. In the sense, it's actually now a very significant band of sites, some which take very, very, very long time to get started, and others which actually move forward quite rapidly. And the key determinants are, you know, the nature of the planning process, specific barriers to site delivery, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, in a sense, the macro conclusion that comes out of that work.
So the important point there is thinking about the particular nature of that site in that location and the issues that need to be addressed and the processes that you'd have to go through to address the issues, etc.
Exactly right. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Fine, okay. But I can look at that if we need to. And some people have referred to it and they may wish to mention it this morning. So let me just talk about your statement. You've said that you're preparing a planning application, hope to submit it around the end of this year.
Yes, that's what it says. Yeah.
Yeah. And that would be based on having carried out any further, obviously SP 17 refers to numerous strategies and bits of work being done. You'd say, well, quite a lot of that work's in hand or has been done, and you can present it in a way that addresses what it's seeking to achieve, presumably.
Yes, that's correct. I mean, obviously a fairly important determinant is your emerging conclusions.
Well, leaving that aside for now. I mean,
setting that aside. So,
yeah.
You know, I think the
just on your, you know, the way you were expecting to deal with it.
So we've been doing a lot of work on this site. I think, as has already been mentioned, going back to 2018 and internal feasibility work, ongoing surveys, internal master planning work, looking at the various requirements of the site. So there is a fairly established view in our mind as to the strategic direction that the master plan for the site would take and the infrastructure requirements associated with that. There are obviously evidence-based requirements that are set out in the policy, but we have a clear sense from the policy as is as to what would be required within them. We've already been looking at EIA scoping and, you know, indeed, before the plan took the direction that it took at Reg 19 stage, we might have anticipated having actually made significant progress before that, before the stage that we're currently at in terms of bringing forward a scoping request and planning application. So that's effectively shaped the assumptions that we're making then about having an application in by the end of this year. We've assumed, it's worth me talking through the sort of broad stages that we had in our development stages, or did you have specific questions?
No, let me just talk through the broad stages. So submission around the end of the year,
Yeah.
then permission early 2026-ish, end of 2024. So a year or so for the application process.
Yeah.
And then development to start in 29-30, which is
Yeah. So completions commence sites early 29-30. But just discharging conditions and opening up the site, so preparatory works in 2028, mid-2028.
okay. So you'd go from permission in early 26 to opening up the site in early 28, development starting.
Well, we said mid-28.
Mid-28, yeah, okay. It doesn't matter. So when you go back to your start to finish evidence, you say some sites can take a very long time, or that evidence has shown that some sites did take a very long time, but some of them be done reasonably quickly. So where would this sort of trajectory that you've described here fall within those past experiences, on the quick side presumably, or on the long side?
I don't think it's actually a document, is it, in front of the start to finish, is it?
Maybe not. I mean, it can be, presumably you could provide it, but certainly people have referred to it. I mean, I can't remember who it was, but someone said that you've warned against the average of the danger of dealing with averages.
Yeah.
A bit like the temperature in this room. But someone referred to 7 years being the average time from validation of an application to first completion. So, that's one indication of a different timescale to what you're describing.
Yeah. So I mean, I think I haven't got a document in front of me, but I can get it and we can do a note if necessary. But so what we're effectively, because in start to finish, there's the period from when an application is submitted through to, and then there's also the timescale from permission being granted and development actually commencing. So there's two things going on there.
Yeah.
One of the key things to remember when looking at the averages in start to finish is that some of the applications are submitted before a local plan has actually been formulated. So some are speculative and things like that, which obviously they tend to have a longer period because the principle of development is yet to be established. So I mean, I would say that the timescales we've got are will be, from the top of my head, quicker than the average, as in the mean or the median. But then that's entirely what you would expect on a site that's been worked on collaboratively with the council, with the DLA reports, with the master planning work that's been undertaken in advance, and effectively many of the key issues understood and capable of relatively quick resolution.
Okay, understood. So we've got your dates. That's fine. I can think about those. We can get views from others. I'll move on and take some views, from let's Pinson's Lane and then the Nexus.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, I just wanted to be precise that there are completions proposed 20 units in 28-29 in the council trajectory in exam 22.
Yeah, I've got that.
And that would suggest that construction commencement of development would be in 27-28. We've talked quite a lot about the various stages that have to go through that before that, and we referred in our statement to the start to finish document, and indeed one I wrote myself about 12 years ago, that things haven't got any quicker since then. I hate to address the elephant in the room, but I would remind people present that the council did, the administration attempted to withdraw the plan on the back of public feeling about this particular allocation. I would find it extraordinarily if then the timescales that the North East Thatcham Partnership has set out could be met in terms of delivery from where we are now through the planning process to delivery on site. I mean, I just don't think it can be sustained. Thank you.
Yeah, understood. Yeah. Nexus.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think the time delivery projections are incredibly ambitious put forward by the council and the North East Thatcham. Lichfield study, which they quote in their opening to say the empirical evidence we produced informed numerous local plan examinations, inquiries, and 5-year land supply statements. It's well researched. It provides an average. I get the point about averages, but sir, this is a complicated site. We've talked already about the need for a master plan. There are certain issues that aren't resolved. Yes, the consortium have done, they say, plenty of preparation for a 2,500 house application. They've master planned it, but the policy is 1,500 houses. There are numerous uncertainties. The site's in different land ownerships. The sites aren't owned by the house builders. They're going to have to exercise options and sell the site either in singly or in parcels. That'll be phased. It's incredibly complicated. I think the Lichfield study as a starting point should be taken, and their average is 6.7 years from submission of an application to first completions. And that's a robust element of evidence that's used throughout the industry and examinations and appeals. The other point, of course, is the submission of a planning application at the end of the year. Again, I think that's incredibly ambitious given where we are with the current local plan. The application is clearly being prepared on the basis of 2,500 houses. You'll see that in the appendices to the consortium statement. Things will change if 1,500 houses is the final scheme. A number of elements of that scheme will change in terms of local centres, the need for so many local centres. It's a long process preparing an application on a site like this, and the community engagement, which the council want to encourage. It's going to be, I would say, at the earliest, at least 12 months for an application to be submitted at the earliest. Factoring in some mechanism where the council can adopt, democratically adopt master plan that's been consulted on based on the 1,500 houses. So you factor that additional year in, plus the Lichfield 6.7 year. I think that gives you a realistic timescale.
Okay, thank you. So sorry, actually going back to what you were saying earlier about the levels of detail that local plans, when you look at the range of time periods in the start to finish, as Mr. Spry said, some of them are much quicker than others and some of them much slower than the average. You know, you get quite a range. From what you were saying about the amount of work done, but also the amount of issues resolved through a local plan policy, you would say that this is on the slower side of things in terms of the clarity and
I think so, through
the processes that still need to be gone through that we've talked about earlier today.
I think through discussion we had yesterday when the consortium were trying to encourage the greater number of houses, we talked about public transport, for example, where 1,500 houses they concluded wouldn't be long-term viable. Only 2,500 houses. So these public transport strategies are incredibly complicated. It's not just putting a bus on, it's negotiating a solution with the local operator, agreeing a commercial subsidy, agreeing a commercial route. That commercial route, of course, will depend on how the site's configured, how it operates. These matters take time, so I've got experience, and that's one element of strategic sites that takes time. The GP surgery, again, we heard discussions yesterday about funding the GP surgery. Is it going to be on site? Is it going to be off site? How much contribution is needed? Can the GP surgery secure additional funding? Then we talk about the secondary school, where the council have admittedly said that they have absolutely no idea how additional funding is going to be raised for a secondary school. You will not
They
build.
didn't quite say that. They said additional funding was needed and they haven't got identified source.
Sorry, sir, but you will not build a two-form entry secondary school. It will not actually happen.
Yeah.
So then you start to think about, well, what are the actual benefits of this 1,500 house site? The council made it very clear that the rationale for a strategic site, which I understand, is that it will deliver wider community benefits, and that's why they went down this policy of large-scale strategic sites. What I'm saying is we have to question that after looking at the one with the 1,500 house site based upon what the consortium has said about what's deliverable and what the council's uncertainties are. What benefit is that 1,500 site going to provide?
Okay.
Sorry, I'm going back now to
Yeah.
I don't want to
No,
argue.
they're all, I'm aware of all those things and there are obviously things I need to think about, but I understand the basic point about the trajectory in this case. You don't think there's any reason why you could justify a faster than the average start to finish type process?
Absolutely
If
not.
anything, you would say it was probably on the other side of the average rather than the quicker side of the average, I think is the basic point you're saying.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Provision.
We would concur with what's been said previously. I would just add about table 3.1 on start to finish that refers to the lower quartiles, mediums and upper quartiles just for the planning approval period. And for 1,500, the lower quartile is 3.7 years. So that's obviously, if they're suggesting 12 months, there's a big difference there. And even the upper quartile is then 6.9 years.
Because for what? From the time it takes to approve the planning application?
That's just the planning approval period. So that excludes the delivery period up to the first completions.
Yeah. So the lower quartile average was 3.7 years. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, I can look at, I mean, well, if this is I think, I know a number of people referred to it, but you're referring to the 2024 version of start to finish here?
Yes, yeah. So it was published on pretty much the same day that the hearing statements were due. So yeah. So this is now the updated version. Yeah.
I mean, just could we have that? I mean, Mr. Spry, probably the best placed person to provide it, but if you could send a copy, we'll put it in the examination library in case. Someone may well have appended it to their statement. I don't know, but I can't recall. But obviously, it's been referred to. So, okay, thank you. Right, Bucklebury Parish Council.
Yeah, thank you. A number of points to make just on what we've heard. Firstly, in terms of an application by the end of the year, obviously that may be possible in terms of getting that together physically and pulling all those reports together, but thinking on what you've just been told before around master planning and around how that process, how on earth that could be a collaborative and meaningful process within that 6 months, just it would not be in terms of bringing that forward, and how an application which brought forward 2,500 units, again, how that would be viewed in terms of that master planning process. So that there's a thought of how you get from where we are now with half a year left to putting in that application in a meaningful way, and no reference of consultation as part of that process. The second point is that my understanding is that that would be an outline application that would come in. So you then have to factor in reserve matters applications on the individual parcels, which would also take time. And if it was 2,500 units to begin with on the outline, highly likely an appeal process, because that's not in accordance with what the council are saying. So that has to be factored in. The other point then is that in terms of a site, all sites like this, one of those reasons for delay between permission and construction starting, or even first delivery of units, is about the infrastructure going in. And I'm not talking about the health and education at the moment. I'm just talking about physically getting road infrastructure and getting stats in from the road. It is very, very complicated. And the issue is that where you have a number of parties involved, no one wants to be the first one. No one wants to have that burden of cost that they've got to get the gas connections in, the road connections in, and all of that. So quite often what you have is a standoff between developers. I've seen it happen. And a good example is the Northern Arc at Burgess Hill, mid Sussex, where Homes England had to step in, or decided to step in, to get that going, because you had a number of providers and putting in the infrastructure. And this site, it's effectively all front loaded from along the front of the site. There's not multiple access points that you could come in. You've got to go over an oil pipeline as well, which we've referred you to. How they're going to do that, don't know. There's then a question about, in terms of this delivery, and then, you know, even just taking for a minute, if you're going to start delivering in 28, 29, and then you're up to 140, 160 a year, okay. But at what point is the council saying that those physical bits of infrastructure have to be delivered by, in terms of the school, in terms of health, and what are the triggers for that? Because another thing that you quite often get is a pause while if those things aren't ready, and we know they aren't ready, at what point then does the matters pause? So that's another point that needs to be considered. And overall, sir, you're faced with a position where the plan in front of you has been modified to say 1,500 units. That's from the council. The North East Acton Partnership are saying they need 2,500 units, and you've heard that a number of times. That's not a modification that's in front of you at the moment. It's unclear of what's coming forward. In examining this plan, you need to be clear in terms of tests of soundness, paragraph 35, the MPPF, about it being effective. It has to be deliverable over the plan period. And for what we're hearing at the moment, it's simply not.
Thank you. Spinters Lane, did you have another point before?
Yes, sir. Thank you. You asked a very pertinent question, actually, about the number of units that were, number of outlets that were expected.
Yeah, I was going to come back to that.
For 160 units per annum, you would expect that to be 3 outlets as a minimum. And that's based on other figures that we set out in our matter statements. But with only 1,500 units on site, it would be extremely unlikely that you would find 3 outlets. Market absorption, proximity between those outlets would just dictate that it wouldn't happen. So I think there is an issue about delivery at that level, as well as the quantum of development.
Okay. Thatcham Town Council.
Yes, thank you, sir. So I can't comment on the rate of delivery, though it does seem extremely ambitious. But my comment was particularly about the intention to submit a planning application of any type by the end of this year, which would appear to be utterly incompatible with the proposed modification to the local plan, that it would be, the master plan would be developed in collaboration with the community and other stakeholders. I think also that another key factor which is going to affect the delivery is that this site will require a number of major items of infrastructure on the site, and that will inevitably have to be on the land of one of the developers. So there's a complicated process about agreeing the way that those are funded between the developers, which I suspect would delay things. And of course, the healthcare and the education, neither of them are viable as a freestanding facility for the site, for either 1,500 or 2,500 houses, as you've heard. And therefore, there needs to be agreement with the whatever other is the complementary provider and the funding sources as to the nature of those before the plans for those can be developed. And in the case of the school, that includes the significant amount of land for the playing fields as well. Thank you.
Thank you. North East Thatcham Partnership again.
Thank you, sir. May I just cover a couple of factual things? Firstly, the 4 parties to the partnership, the 4 partners, have, unlike, for instance, in the Burgess Hill example to which reference was made, have a collaboration agreement which is formalised and signed at the moment. In other cases, including Burgess Hill, one of the critical problems that held up delivery was lack of agreement about equalisation across a complicated site, and that obviously can cause significant delay. Not the case here. So very, very important to note that this is a team of partners which has agreed the key commercial mechanism to bring the site forward. The second point about outlets, sir, is that if you have, for your note, have a look at the Appendix 3 to which you've made reference, that's in the development statement that Lichfields have provided. That's as it were, the partnership's trajectory expectations. you'll see that it anticipates 4 outlets operating. On a site like this, fun enough, the shape of the site and so on makes that rather easier. If you compare that with, and I'll just give you the reference, table 5.2, when you get your copy of the latest version of Start to Finish, table 5.2, you'll see that for 4 outlets, that's actually 160 is a conservative estimate. Start to Finish shows a rather higher figure if you've got 4 outlets. So it's not, as it were, pushing the envelope as far as delivery is concerned from that number of outlets. But the other point I wanted to make, so just reflecting on what's been said, is about trajectory and how long things take in various different respects. Obviously, one appreciates things often take longer than people hope. Obviously, that's true. But stepping back from it, pretty much all of the points that you've heard from, as it were, objective parties to the allocation are arguments against, for instance, an SPD phase taking 2 years or more. Very important to put those 2 points together that we've just heard over the past hour or so. Absolutely along the grain of the point that the partnership is making, that if you add unnecessary stages, that causes delay. Quite right also, if the plan says 1,500 in the end, that's going to cause delay, quite right. So that is definitely a downside to delivery. If, because of the change that the council has made, all of that work has to be unpicked and the application needs to be changed. In terms of what is assumed, the application at the end of the year is still absolutely possible, and it's not true to say that that wouldn't be possible taking into account proper collaborations. It's simply not the case. There's plenty of time. We know, obviously, lots of views about the scheme, not just objections in principle, but specific things about the buffer and so on that local people want to say, local groups want to say. And if you think about it, we're in mid to late May. There's plenty of time for those other things to feed through. But the point of having a process that isn't cut off and a procedural step introduced is that the process of collaboration continues on the development of the master plan post the application, which is my point about flexibility earlier on. So it would be quite inimical to the delivery of the site if that was all that had to be tied up and finished before the application was made. The other point I'd make, so is, it's a very good point. I think it was Mr. Bodkin's point, I may say so. Always good points made by Mr. Bodkin. It is his elephant in the room point about West Berks wanted to withdraw the plan and so on. Now, sir, you mentioned politics right at the beginning of these sessions yesterday, and it's worth coming back to it, I think, because it is true. But what are the consequences really of the point that Mr. Bodkin makes? This is a process, obviously, this examination about soundness and the relevant policy, the planning policies, not about politics, about the MPPF and application of policy. And the output of the exercise is something that the council will have to take into account in thinking about their general points and public pressure and politics. But if this process sends, as I'm sure it will one way or the other, sir, a very clear message about what the plan needs to say to be sound, that itself is a hugely important aspect of how the matter is dealt with at the local level. So it's not right to say that this process will lead to the same type of approach being taken by West Berks as they did and tried to take in December. It's a whole new ball game, if I can put it that way, the outcome of the EIP. And then the final point, so about a year to permission specifically from making the application. There are sometimes disagreements even with on allocations. And there may be in this case, I'm not saying there will be, but there may be. But if you think about the year or thereabouts that's in the programme at the moment, scepticism has been expressed by some parties to the examination. But it's not all in the outcome in the gift of the local authority, obviously, because there is a right of non-determination appeal in all applications, as you know. And if we get to a stage where it's clear that, for instance, and I make no bones about it, so for political reasons, the application is not being progressed, then that is the recourse that the partnership would have. And that goes directly to sensible judgments about how long things may take.
In terms of what you say about the planning application being submitted around the end of the year
Yes.
and being able to build into that process effective collaboration, what thought have you given to my role and when I may decide certain things about this? I mean, obviously, we've had a lot of discussion over the last couple of days and more to come this afternoon. But is there anything that you would need to wait for to help from me to help inform that process?
Absolutely. I think Mr. Spry made the point earlier on. Absolutely. Your determination, particularly about the overall number, is very important in that. But it's not the only thing. Obviously, there are all sorts of things that we know that local parties are interested in talking about. So the answer is yes, there would be some things that would have to wait and be influenced. Others would not. And so the work can start and collaboration can continue even in advance of your report.
It's a bit hard to envisage how the community and other stakeholders could effectively engage and collaborate with you in the coming months with the lack of certainty about the actual plan being in place and what it might say.
Again, that would be a matter for the locals, but there are obviously some, and there are some objections in principle, if you like, obviously, but that's a matter for them to take into account. The overall final report, if you like, will be preceded, I'm assuming, by modifications, indications from you.
Well, the process, I mean, as you know, I'm sure, but when I've held these hearing sessions, I will go away and deliberate. I mean, as I've said, I'll issue some action points as we go along, but there may be other things I need longer to think about, as I've already said. That process will go through. Then the normal next step would be a comprehensive schedule of main modifications to be consulted upon.
Yes.
I suppose you could say, well, at that point, that's a trigger to a relative degree of certainty about where this plan may end up. But then there is a process to go through, and then there's a final report for me to produce and a plan to be adopted.
Absolutely.
All of which.
Yeah. But the point about the modification stage, obviously, that's
what you see as key.
Well, it's a pretty big steer, I think. Obviously, in real terms, about how we might sensibly discuss things with local groups.
Okay. So in terms of the key element of the examination process that would influence what you could do effectively to get an application submitted as soon as you can, that would be this or one of the triggers. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. The Town Council again, briefly.
Thank you, sir. So I don't understand how Lichfield can believe that they understand what the community wants, because the planning process so far, I would say going back even as far as the workshop in the strategic growth study, has only given us the opportunity to say what we don't want about what is the specific thing that's being proposed. We haven't had any opportunity to say positively what we would like. We occasionally sneak things in. And so you justifiably can sometimes say that they're not relevant to your role. But if we say something, we'd like to improve something, you say that's not your role. But the point is that by and large, the opportunities that we've been presented to say things in public have all been about what we think and what we think is unsound or what we think is wrong with a specific proposal, and not what we think we would like, which is what I think the consultation process should be about. Thank you.
Okay, well, yes, although presumably, I don't want to dwell on this too much longer, but I mean, the purpose of this examination is to get a sound plan in place. The sound plan should provide a clear framework for what then follows in terms of the planning application and anything intervening, i.e. some master planning process and collaboration. So, you know, that your effective engagement to shape the plan, that was the plan making process. Now you can question the effectiveness of that, but I mean that was a process that goes on with the local planning authority over a number of years, and we're beyond that.
I was referring to the suggestion that I thought North East Section Partnership made, was that they understood what the community wanted in the development that they've done so far on their master plan. Thank you.
Right, I want to yes.
I won't repeat it. So you've already had some evidence, I think, from Mr. Ward on our behalf this morning, for instance, about meetings where allotments, for instance, were very strongly desired just to give you one example by the local community. So I'm afraid it's simply not true to say that there haven't been events and opportunities which were taken up by members of the local community to say what they would like as well as what they don't like.
Okay, thank you. Right. No,
So factually, that is incorrect.
no, well, yeah, I don't want to. Right. Let's get some views from the council if you wish anything to say on this. I mean, I think there are things to clearly I need to reflect on.
So I don't think there's anything further to add. Lichfields have obviously got all the background information in terms of start to finish and have given you information about why they see what they see coming. In terms of the master plan process, the council doesn't see that as something that would significantly delay an application, even with collaboration, which could easily take place before the end of the year. And you've heard what was said about the number of outlets and how the site could be easily portioned up so that those outlets could deliver the number of houses that Lichfield say is achievable.
Okay, noted, but I think I'll give it some more thought. But I mean, basically, I think what you were saying is that the trajectory that you've provided to me is purely based on what Lichfields have said to you. It doesn't involve any analysis of your own processes and procedures. And there's quite a lot that we've discussed today about the process by which the master planning. I know what you're saying about the council thinks that the most master planning process needn't take a long time, and it could result in, it could be done and result in an application by the end of the year. But I'm not personally, I have to say, I'm not totally convinced about that.
The master planning process that the council envisages isn't one like the SPD formal adoption process. And in terms of its own information, as you heard from Mrs. Code, the council doesn't have specific strategic site information that it can easily apply across to this site. So it has taken a lot of its information from Lichfields. But in terms of the master planning process, the council doesn't see that as something that should significantly delay the application.
No, but isn't there a fundamental problem that you know that the application is being worked up and therefore would presumably be at this stage, unless I were to give a clear steer to the contrary, which may not come until, as they've said, main modifications are published, which I've not actually thought through when that may be, but it'll be later this year at the earliest, I suppose. But anyway, I can't, how could effective collaboration on the basis of an application being worked up and a master planning process be carried out for 2,500 when the council's plan is 1,500? It seems to be a fundamental.
Obviously, that issue, that steer from you and from this process is the one that's going to kickstart the process.
Yeah, okay. I mean, in terms of what this plan has not changed. This plan, as I see it, the plan that's been submitted, that was submitted in March last year, so well over a year ago, was published for consultation December before, and some months before that, a decision was made to this policy to be 1,500, not 2,500. So we're probably talking 2 years have gone by the time, that have elapsed since that decision's made. So it's not a new proposal by the council that's suddenly come in. So, well, I just, that's the background, isn't it? That's where we're at. So, okay. Right, thank you. Right, Councillor Reid.
Just quickly, from what I'm hearing, both from the council and from Lichfields, I'm significantly concerned that it sounds like the next stage will be a steamrolling, and the community's views will not have time to be developed and reflected upon. So I'm significantly concerned. I'm also concerned there was statements on significant engagement beforehand. Actually, the developers were invited to Buckerbury Village Hall some time ago when our MP spoke there as well, when there was discussions about it going from 2,500 to 1,500. The developers were invited to talk, but did not engage with us at all.
Okay, so I suppose it's the same point again, really, that you would like some formal mechanism to ensure that any master planning process and engagement, it can actually have some controls within it rather than relying on some sort of more fluid ad hoc process led by the developer.
And I think it needs to be more visible. So when I look at other developers in the area, for example, Grundens, which are doing a development for a solar farm near Beenham, have actively been engaging with the community and have done several town halls where they have presented in the village hall. There really hasn't been much at all within our village halls for the local villages north of Thatcham. I can't speak for Thatcham itself, so it's very much having us to dig away to find what's going on, rather than the community being engaged with noticing town halls, villages.
And from your perspective, and local residents who don't know much about this, but what's the role of this plan in providing a context for that work? Because is it important to have that clarity of at least of things like the numbers, the scale of development, and some broad?
Absolutely. So, for example, we're very for the vibrancy of a village. For example, our own primary school in Upper Bucklebury, the majority of the pupils actually come from North East Thatcham, and so what does it mean by having 2 new primary schools within the area? Does that mean that supply for our own primary school dries up and we stop becoming a vibrant village ourselves? There's loads of questions we need to reflect on, and we can't do that with the mechanism that was previously used. We need more active engagement. And if this is, well, it's clearly, the plan is going to go ahead by the looks of it, but we need a community to be engaged a lot more effectively than has been done in the past.
Okay, thank you. Right. Something else I was going to ask, but I can't remember what it was now. I think that, I might just deal with viability. I think we've dealt with, the trajectory as best we can today. And I think there's certainly some further work that I'm going to be looking for in terms of setting out possibly some scenarios about that. Anyway, I'll think about that. In terms of viability, I don't really have a great deal of questions about it. As I said, there's been at least 3 bits of work done, and there doesn't seem to be any real dispute about viability, apart from the issue of, and this is more, the council's satisfied that 1,500 dwellings could deliver the infrastructure that's proposed in policy SB 17. We had some detailed discussion about the secondary school and the GP surgery, and you were clear in that would require some external funding being provided and whatever. And I may have ask for a bit more clarity about that in due course. But so leaving that aside, the broad picture from your point of view is 1,500 can deliver policy SB 17 and the various social and other infrastructure that's proposed within it. That's the position from the council.
Yes, that's a position.
Yeah, and that includes an update to the plan-wide viability assessment that actually specifically looked at 1,500, and it ran the model again based on that.
Yes, that's right.
And one of the things that did was it assumed higher development values than had been assumed in the earlier study. That made the difference, because in the earlier study, I think in the smaller scale development that I'm looking at, that was one of the key things that changed.
Yes, simply as a reflection of how the market had moved on over time.
And that that's based on your analysis of what happened.
Yes, and what you'll also see in there that there is sensitivity testing about different value levels, etc., because we can't and shouldn't be projecting as such, but we have to make a judgment on where we think the values lie. So there's no implicit assumption in there about values growth, but we do have to set our stall out on how we think they look at the point in time.
Yeah, but sorry, I think what I'm saying, that the earlier analysis
it relied on lower values.
Yeah, lower values.
That's right. Yes.
But whereas the costs, I think.
The costs again were all updated. So the infrastructure costs were taken prorated from the first set of work.
Yeah.
The base build costs and things were all updated.
but they hadn't
So-
increased as much as the values. Is that
No,
why?
at that point, the market's going to move, it's a dynamic thing, isn't it? But so the pace of growth in values is not always going to be the same as the pace of cost inflation, and it's how those things balance out. The exercise is really all about the strength of the relationship between value and cost, which is broadly positive here, which is why you're hearing the consensus that there's a viable scheme here. But how that looks exactly from one point in time to another will vary.
Yeah, okay. So the big picture is this. There's nothing about this particular site, this particular development that should propose a significant.
No, I mean, I think being sitting here listening, I think most of what we've heard really is reflective of large-scale strategic development. Here we don't have motorway junctions, we don't have major highway link roads. We're not talking about railway station. It's a very significant development. Well, all developments, let alone developments of this scale, come with abnormal costs, come with a lot of uncertainty, a lot of detail to be worked through. There's no sort of major red flag issues, if I can put it like that.
Yeah. Okay, no, thank you. And the market in this part of West Berkshire, in terms of the values and the strengths.
Yes, I mean, it's that's one of the positive things. It is obviously a relatively higher value. It's not the highest value area in the southeast, but it's there aren't any low value areas. That in itself leads through, of course, to affordability and affordable housing. That's part of the scheme proposal and the policy. But yes, the values are relatively strong and sufficient to support the levels of cost that have been worked up so far.
Okay, thank you. I'll come on to Lichfields in a minute, because I just need to be clarification really of your position in terms of whether the proposal in the plan is viable, or it is essential to have 2,500, or it's something in between. Because I've read different things into different things that have been said in different statements, actually, I think, in terms of that and what I've heard over the last day and a half. So I'll come back to that in a minute, but let me just take a couple of views from here. So Bucklebury Parish Council first.
Yes, thank you, sir. We had the same concerns. I am not a viability expert, and potentially being guilty here of honing in on one point, but as I understand it, the North East Action Partnership had Turner Moorham review the Dixon Cells work, and that's in the appendix to their matter statement.
Yeah.
And there was a curious bit on page 2 at the bottom of that, and maybe I'll just read it out to you, and I think it behoves some explanation on this and in general terms. But that talks about the amount for infrastructure per dwelling, which I understand equates to 9,050 per dwelling. And it says in the Turner Moorham report, penultimate paragraph of page 2, in my view, this is a low infrastructure cost allowance in comparison with other similar schemes, even allowing for the 4.7 million viability surplus, which in theory could be used to deliver the additional infrastructure without prejudicing the scheme viability. That being said, I understand that the subject development was intended to be infrastructure led, which does not appear to be the case based on this conservative cost allowance. So I think that certainly requires, from our perspective, some confirmation. And then I was just reflecting on what we were talking about on biodiversity and all of the requirements of this site, and whatever happens with that buffer, it is a significant area. It's broadly 50% of the site would be undeveloped, and there's large questions hanging around what happens to that, how it's managed, what needs to be done. And it's in the very last page of the Dixon Cells Partnership on the construction costs. For biodiversity net gain, they've got a total figure of £1.2 million for that. And to me, for 50% of the site, that seems very, very low in terms of what might need to be happened. So I think there's some questions around that as well of how that's been properly costed, because the last thing we want to see is if this does go forward, to have something in that buffer that's just, you know, not a buffer and not well managed at all. So those 2 points, sir.
Thank you. Vincent Slane.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure whether this qualifies me for the term viability expert, but I have written several whole plan viability studies in my life, and I'm used to picking through the tables. I note what Mr. Dixon has said about broadly speaking, his gut feel about the viability of the scheme, but I just wanted to draw your attention to table 2G in the residential results update, which is when the update which scaled back the numbers from 2,500 to 1,500. On net land area, the comment is no WBC update information available, so maintained area for previous 2,500 units considered likely unrealistic. Similarly, on benchmark land value, no WBC update information available, so maintained benchmark land BLV cost for previous 2,500 units considered likely unrealistically high. I'm not sure whether they in themselves really meet the tests of soundness in terms of your assessment of whether the evidence base is sufficiently robust in this respect. And can I just ask you to clarify the point on infrastructure costs? Because I think Mr. Dixon said that they'd been carried over from 2020. So I just didn't understand, and prorated. So I didn't understand if that was a reduction from 1,500 over 2,500, and then any assessment of any infrastructure cost inflation since 2020, because as you well know, there's somewhere between 24 to 38% in infrastructure cost inflation in that period. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, let's go back and deal with those specific queries since they've been raised. Actually, maybe on the net developable area, which is referred to 120 hectares in your table, this is looking at the same one as was referred to there. This is table 2G, I think, isn't it? Yeah. In the 2022 update, yeah. Whether that is affected in any way by what the council are now talking about, the developable area being, I don't know whether it's, I don't know what net developable area is, but the 170 hectare site, of which the council now say 100 hectares broadly is developable, but within that, it's about 50 that's developable for actual homes. And that's what leads to the 1,500. Is there anything inconsistent about those assumptions and what you've factored through in this table?
No, sir. That's sort of, if I can answer that sort of hand in hand with colleagues' point over here. So the benchmark land value is a hurdle or a test applied based on existing use value. So greenfield land value uplifted to provide us an incentive to the landowner. The point about not altering that assumption going between our stage 1 in 2021 and stage 2 in 2022 was that at the time there wasn't a clear picture on whether the red line itself would shrink as a result of the reduction in proposed dwelling numbers from 2,500 to 1,500. So the prudent assumption to make from a viability point of view is to still assume that there's a need to purchase all of that land at the same cost rate per hectare. So that's what we did. And what that could mean, we don't know the details yet, but what that could mean is there's actually a sort of a buffer, a cushion in there in terms of the amount of land value that is allowed for in creating this hurdle for the viability appraisal to meet. So certainly we're comfortable that if anything, that assumption errs in the right direction in terms of viability and what that could mean for extra cost that may be encountered through actually sort of homing in on the infrastructure detail once the scheme is designed. At the point we ran this, we didn't have a revised detailed assessment of infrastructure costs. So it all dates back to the DLA information that was hand in hand with their work. And, you know, we did make some assumptions about the proportion of that cost that would carry forward. Doing all of that, I'm going to check, but we didn't make a specific inflationary cost allowance because there's sort of assumptions on assumptions by the time you do that. But we felt that the over allowance, likely over allowance for land value in there was going to act as a sort of a reasonable proxy for some flex in the viability.
Okay, so just going back to the benchmark land value, I don't want to get bogged down in this, but the whole site, the red line is 170 hectares. Wouldn't all of that land have to be bought?
Yes, that's right. Yes,
Oh,
so that's what we allow for. So, sorry, I'm just simply saying that in appraising initially at 2,500 dwellings, we were at 170 hectares total. We haven't reduced that assumed site area and then appraising the 1,500.
Yeah.
So if anything, we've over allowed on land cost, if that makes sense.
Still the 170 hectares have to be bought.
Well, at the time we didn't know that.
No.
So, yeah.
No. Okay. And the net developable area, well, that's not linked to.
No, so it's not about the key assumption from the viability appraisal point of view is the BLV, benchmark land value one. Yeah.
Because that gives you a total amount of money you have to raise to be able to incentivize the landowners to sell it.
Yes, correct.
In theory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Sorry, just very quickly, just to note really there that we heard that sales values were uprated, build costs have been uprated, but infrastructure costs not.
Yeah, thank you. Right. It is after 1. I just wonder whether, have you got a lot you wish to say about viability or?
No, I mean, it may take 10 to 15 minutes, maybe in all with council response and so on.
Yeah, okay. Well, I think maybe let's have a break because we're going to have back after lunch because I've got some other matters on the agenda. Is that, sorry, unless there's someone who particularly would like to?
Not at all. I was just checking. That's absolutely fine, sir.
Is that okay?
Of course.
So I think we'd better have a break now and then because we've got some other matters we need to deal with. So we'll come back and finish off viability. Shall we say 2 o'clock? Is that okay for everyone? 50 minutes? Yeah, okay. We'll resume at 2, please.